I didn't take it one at a time, but it's a wrap-up of all 6 items.
We're good. Lane, are you comfortable?
Move to approve.
Second?
Can I
Wait.
clarify the motion? I'm sorry. Agenda items C, E, F, G, H, and I.
H and I.
Okay.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second, and another vote? 7-0. To the regular agenda. Alliance, and we have the Ports to Plains Alliance President Michael Reeves here today to speak to us.
Morning, Mayor, council members. Appreciate the opportunity to come before you today and give you an update on where we stand with the Ports to Plains Alliance. Relationship with the city of San Angelo and a great support here. I know Mr. Hebert, Councilman Hebert, was on our board of directors. We've worked with Mayor Morrison in the past, former councilperson Charlotte Farmer. Chris Cornell continues to serve. John Barrio has been a partner, and it goes back to when Ron Lewis was with the city of Lubbock and was working on this project with us. So we have a long history with the council, even going to when Lane was up with us in Washington, and so we appreciate that. And we want to give you an update on where we are with the project and where we are moving forward. So I had a presentation ready to kind of show some maps, but our organization started back in the mid-90s. Just give you, we started back in the mid-90s with, and it was, well, great, city council project with this, it kind of came out of the City of Lubbock City Council planning retreat, looking for economic development opportunities. And we had I-27 that ran from Lubbock to Amarillo, and we looked at, they said, well, how can we capitalize on that? How can we expand that and capitalize on the trade? They saw what was happening on I-35 with the implementation of NAFTA, and we said, hey, here's a piece of infrastructure. If we can work to improve that, it gives us the connectivity and the economic stimulus that would come with that. So we worked, in our initial corridor designation was from Denver to the Mexican border, emphasizing on I-27 and the feasibility studies that came along with that, and looked and identified the route primarily following US 87. And we start in Denver and we have 2 routes actually getting into Interstate 25. One runs through New Mexico directly on Highway 87, and then the other runs through 287 through eastern Colorado. Kind of different routes, the two. And some truck traffic, but more of commuter traffic or passenger traffic, people going to the mountains, going skiing, that sort of thing. 287 is interesting. It's at least 2/3 truck traffic. A lot of the truck drivers like to get off of I-25, like to avoid the Raton Pass and go to the mountain turn. So that's an interesting route. There's also a split once you get to La Mesa to Sterling City. One route would swing to the west and connect into Midland and Odessa, and then follows Highway 158 over where it reconnects into Highway 87, with the other route being continuing 87 to San Angelo. Then once we get to San Angelo, we go down to Del Rio on 277, follow that over to Carrizo Springs where we hook into Highway 83, and then down to Laredo. Interesting thing about that, it gives us access to 3 ports of entry on the Mexican border, and we've had a lot of success in doing that. You know, when we first started this, divided to Big Spring, so that completion over to down to San Angelo was a Ports to Plains initiative project or supported project. New Mexico finished their stretch of the corridor 4-lane divided in their territory, and so it runs really you can get 4-lane divided from Interstate 25 down to San Angelo, and then TxDOT has invested quite a bit with the Prop 12 funding, with new funds now. With the passing lanes that have been added between San Angelo and Sonora, and they're working now between Eagle Pass and Del Rio. So that gives us a great upgraded route. Probably about a little over half of the highway now is 4-lane divided. Reliever routes are going in that are planned. I know the latest one that's under construction now is in Big Spring. And so we're seeing tremendous progress. I think overall we've had over $1 billion invested in the corridor in Texas, and when we take all our partners into account, over $2 billion have been invested in federal and state funds into the corridor. We do partner. We don't dead end in Del Rio, and we don't dead end in Laredo. We don't dead end in Denver. We work with some other partner organizations, and we have memberships now that run from Alberta, Canada, down to the west coast of Mexico with our partners there. And it's interesting because similar interests with these other communities, even though we were a wide geographic area. It's primarily economies that are rural and depend on agriculture and energy production. So it gives us a tremendous, we're creating connectivity with our trade partners, with the communities that are similar interests to us and have similar functions and goals. So we're very excited about that energy and the common interest that we develop. We go from 4 states to 9 states. So we go from 8 senators to 18 senators. So we have a lot more influence that way. We have over 275 members right now. Primarily they're cities, counties, chambers of commerce, economic development organizations. We have some businesses and some of the universities that pay. And you can look, this map is taken from our website, and every one of those dots on the map is one of our members. And you can actually go there and click on it and pull up information about the cities, some connections and some links to their websites, economic development websites, and so people can get an idea of where we are. And we have a volunteer board from throughout the corridor that represents our interests and is active with state and federal legislative issues as they arise. When we were down, I remember going before a Transportation Commission meeting when I was with the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce, and one of the commissioners goes, "Why do you need money for highways in Lubbock? You can roller skate on freeways in Lubbock. Why? You look at it at 35 here." And so I like to pull up this map because it shows them if you like to eat, you need our corridor. If you look where the farm production is in this country, it runs right down the middle of the country, and that's and so that gives us a strong case, even though we may not have the high population counts. We have to get our farm products to market. And it was seen by the a couple weeks ago with the Farm Ag Committee hearing here. There's tremendous economic impact in this region, but there's not enough of us to buy all the blue jeans and T-shirts that our cotton produces. We've got to get it out. And so that's what we try to do, is get our goods to market, lower the transportation costs for getting that out, and that keeps more money in the local economy. And so we look at who buys farm products, and it's really China is number one, but they flip-flop back and forth pretty regularly with Canada. They're about $20 billion a year each, give and take. And so it's pretty close between China and Canada. And then Mexico's our third leading buyer of farm products. And so down here in Texas, it's probably more Mexico as a trade partner. And then there's a pretty significant drop-off till we get to the European Union. So we're our markets in Canada, to our access to our markets in Mexico, but also with the connectivities to the ports on the west coast of Mexico and Mazatlan, it gives another shipping route, and it's another lower cost alternative to get our goods to Asia and to our big trade partner in China as well. And that's what's interesting, is agriculture is so important because it's, when we're talking about trade deficits and trade balance, it's actually an area where we have exports, and it's a strong export market for us. NAFTA, of course, is critical for agriculture. 20 billion in Canada, 17, 18 billion really in Mexico, and they're growing. You can look at the charts there, and it's a growing demand for that, for our farm products. So it's critical for us to have that trade potential. We're also the top energy corridor, really, when you look at it. We have 5 of the top 6 gas-producing states, 6 of the top 10 oil-producing states, including the top 2 in the United States, and Texas and North Dakota is actually the number 2 oil-producing state in the country. And we also have a lot of wind energy going on with 9 of the top 12 wind energy potential states. Heavily infrastructure dependent upon that. You look at one wind components of the tower itself. I'm not talking about all the trucks bringing concrete to build the pads and the rebar and all that. Just for the tower itself, you're looking at 8 to 10 oversized loads that are coming through, which would require pilot cars, and another 5 regular truckloads. So you're looking at 13 to 15 trucks per tower. And so you can take that out to some of the wind farms that are planned in the region that are looking at over 2,500 towers, and you're looking at 40,000 trucks on the highways. And so it's really important for us to have access to these sites and good infrastructure. And we can see a tremendous impact that's having in the Panhandle, where they built the new transmission lines, and it's opened up a lot of development of wind farms. BNSF has put in a wind transport facility, transloading facility in Plainview, just north of Lubbock. So every time you're on I-27 now between Lubbock and Amarillo, every rest stop is full of nacelle. They're filling it up, and it's having a big impact. And also what it can do as well, you know, these are big equipment. It costs $15 a mile to move one of these blades down the highway. So what it does is it gives an incentive for our regional economic developers to bring in manufacturers, because they want to be as close as they can to the wind farms. So that's a benefit for us as well with the infrastructure. Same thing with oil and gas, 1,700 trucks to bring a crude oil well into development. And we've seen that here in the region as well. I know probably heavier in the Permian Basin, the Midland, Odessa area, where they're overrun with the freight from just trucks moving in the region going to the well sites. So it's the same sort of thing. You have to have that infrastructure in place to connect, to drive our economy. And it's kind of the big thing that we're working on to make the improvements with our corridor is we're working very closely with the state departments of transportation. We work very closely with TxDOT. And the big thing is, they had their freight mobility plan, which came out a couple years ago in 2015. And in that plan, they specifically, a couple things that jumped out at us. One was that by 2040, over 70% of the state's population and over 80% of the employment is going to be within 5 miles of an interstate. And I know that's particularly of interest here in San Angelo, where you look at the largest state or largest city that's not on an interstate highway. So it shows the tremendous impact of not only transportation, but for some reason the cachet that interstate has there. They've also particularly pointed out that the state has to look at improving existing facilities, but also developing future freight corridors. We can't just keep putting money on I-35 and expect to. You just can't build your way out of that with the congestion there. And so among those other routes they looked at were designating interstates on I-27 extending, and then also US 190, which was designated as Interstate 14. So those are two, San Angelo right at the crossroads of two potential new interstates. And they also designated Ports to Plains as a primary non-interstate freight network. And so what's also interesting for us is they're updating that plan. Right after the TxDOT put out this freight plan, the federal government passed a new 5-year transportation authorization bill. So TxDOT has to go back and update that plan, which they're doing right now. And they're going to unveil the draft at a meeting later this month and probably go to the commission in September. And so some of the things we're working on there is to increase the push to get I-27 extended in that, as well as designating the corridor overall. And so some of the draft plans, I know they had designated a new federal program for critical rural freight corridors, and the stretch from 87 between San Angelo and Big Spring was identified as being designated for the critical rural freight program. So we're having an impact there with TxDOT, and we have strong support there with the department. And I think that's one of the key things for us, and I think what's really important is to have our members working together to continue to push this idea, because I think the timing's right with TxDOT to move forward with that. And that brings us kind of where we are with Interstate 27. Our project initially started out as an extension of Interstate 27. How do we get I-27 extended to take advantage of this? And when we started in the mid-90s, the traffic counts weren't there, and it really wasn't feasible. But to give you an idea of how long it takes to move these projects forward, just that highway itself, they started paving it in 1929 and weren't finished until the 40s. They completed the 4-lane divided construction in the 60s, and then in 1968, the congressman from Lubbock, George Mahon, was chairman of, I can't remember, the Appropriations or Ways and Means, one of the two big budget committees. And he needed his city on an interstate, so he cobbled enough deals together with other members that had some leftover interstate miles and got this 125-mile stretch of interstate between Lubbock and Amarillo, which is designated in 1968, but even then the construction on that didn't start until 75 and wasn't finished until the 90s. And the total cost was under $500 million, $450 million, which is really, when you look at the highway funding, that's quite a bargain to get that done. But it shows how long these projects take, and that brings us to today. Mayor Glenn Robertson in Lubbock went to TxDOT. We were at a meeting a few years ago, and he said, why don't we look at I-27 extending that again? And TxDOT was responsive. They said, we haven't looked at that in a while, and we need to, like you saw with the freight plan, is, hey, we need to start looking at this. And they did a kind of a really high-level look at what it would take to extend I-27. The projected cost just within Texas from the top of the panhandle would be converting it at about $7 billion for full controlled access interstate. Where we've been working primarily focusing right now is getting it extended to the south, working from where it ends in Lubbock now down to Laredo, which is about 500 miles. And if we can do that, that would cost about $5 billion is what the projection is. The reason we started looking at a southern extension before we started working north is by doing it going to the south. Number one, we have access to Laredo, which is where about 2/3 of the U.S.-Mexico truck traffic comes through right now. And it can give us an opportunity to divert some traffic off of I-35. Some of that freight doesn't have to go up through Austin and congestion in Dallas and San Antonio, we have the capacity to take some of that. So it gives us a good reason to extend all the way down to the south. Also, by staying within Texas alone, it makes it a much simpler process. We have one Department of Transportation to work with as opposed to four. Federally, it's a lot easier for the designation. So that's where we're working on. Now, you compare that, it is a lot more expensive to do that. If we were going strictly to go to complete the upgrades to 4-lane divided, it would be about $2 billion. And these are, again, rough numbers. It could be a little higher than that now with inflation and by the time you get everything completed. But it gives you an impact of how much more expensive it is to build interstate. But then again, interstate versus 4-lane divided, you have to have frontage roads, so you're basically doubling the lane miles you're putting in. You have to have overpasses, controlled access, so it's quite a bit of a project there. But we 35, and we talked about how TxDOT can't just keep putting money into I-35. There was one project, pulled this off of the I-35 TxDOT website. In Dallas, they were rebuilding a section of 28 miles, and it was almost $5 billion right there. So cost effectively, we can build interstate a lot cheaper out in the rural areas in West Texas. So for 28 miles, I can get you 500. Even some of the more rural stretches, $1.5 billion for a stretch in McLennan and Bell County down through Waco, what they're working on. There's one in Fort Worth over almost $2 billion for 18 miles. So we can be a cost-effective way and also address some of those congestion concerns that they would have in the Metroplex. And then I think the timing's right because the U.S.-Mexico trade is supporting that extension. We talked about how important it is for trade. But overall, U.S.-Mexico trade is continuing to grow. It's almost doubled since 2005. It's over $500 billion and continue to grow. And the thing about that is most of it moves by truck. You have to have the truck traffic to move that. There's no major north-south interstate west of I-35 in Texas. And really, if you look at a U.S. map, there's very few north-south interstates west of I-35 anyway. You have I-15, I-5, I-25, but there's very little north-south connectivity. So that's why we feel there's a hole, if you look at a map of Texas, to serve this part of the state. And then also the congestion that we can help alleviate. We touched upon that. Austin on I-35 is the top-ranked congested spot in the state for truck traffic. So as freight looks to move and just-in-time economies, there's a good, strong case to be made for that. And we can't forget about our Canadian partners as well. It's the #1 market for most U.S. states for trade, and it's over trade going across the U.S.-Canadian border. They're our #1 foreign market. They buy more export products from us than anyone. And they're also our #1 foreign oil supplier, and that's probably most important for this area. There were some numbers coming out that, for the impact that Canadian oil production has in our area. It's not just the refineries that benefit, but there's probably for every 2 jobs in Canada that are created from their oil sands production, there's a third in the United States because we have the expertise in oil field equipment, drilling, pipe production, and those sorts of materials that are exported to Canada to support that industry. So it's a good bilateral and feeds both trades that way. So that's why it's important for us to have a good relationship with Canada and the connectivity as well. The timing's right. TxDOT has more money now than they did before with the passage of Prop 7, Prop 1. Prop 1 was the oil royalty severance tax funds, the rainy day money going to highway funds. When oil was $100 a barrel, they put about $1.7 billion into the highway fund, which was significant. The last estimates for this past year is going to be about $500 million. So it's dropped off, but it's still significantly more than what we had before. Prop 7 is shifting a portion of the sales tax going into the Highway Trust Fund, and then in 2020 they're going to shift some of the vehicle sales tax will be going into the gas tax fund. And so that's projected to bring in $2.5 to $3 billion in new transportation funding. That doesn't solve all the problems for transportation in the state, but it does indicate that there's more opportunity for TxDOT to build highways and look at adding on. We're working, the Trump administration has proposed $1 trillion infrastructure package. And we haven't heard a whole lot about it. We just know it's going to be great. And we don't know exactly what it's going to be. Some of the early things that were floated out with that were that it's going to be focused primarily on bringing in private funds. And that would mean, essentially what that would mean is we want big toll road projects, as well as pipelines or water infrastructure. And there's a lot more going into this infrastructure than strictly highways, for upgrades. But part of that with the highways, a lot of the focus initially was on big urban toll road projects, toll projects that could pay for themselves with the private investment and those public-private partnerships. There was a lot of pushback from the rural states and the rural senators saying, you know, if you're going to do a federal infrastructure investment plan, we have roads in rural areas that are not toll viable. We have to look at the whole overall picture. And so there's been we're working with a lot of our congressional delegation, and we're circulating a proposal for, you know, why the Ports to Plains corridor could be an ideal target project to be focused on in a federal infrastructure package. And it's one of those things where if you look at these projects individually, you know, upgrading the highway between Sonora and Del Rio doesn't have the traffic counts to be competitive individually against an interchange in the Austin area that's going to have millions of cars a day going past it. But when you look at it on a big picture with the oil and gas and the energy movement, when you look at the wind power movement, when you look at the agriculture production, taken as a whole, this corridor is significant. So we're working a lot with that. We're also working with TxDOT, and TxDOT's focus on freight movement and the latest federal highway bill on freight movement. And as well, I think what gives us some momentum is the Interstate 14, because part of the designation they're looking at on the west part of I-14 actually overlaps with the designated Ports to Plains corridor, with I-14 coming up through Highway 87 from San Angelo over to 158 into Midland, Odessa. So what we've kind of worked closely with the I-14 organization and are working to see if there could be a co-designation of I-27 and I-14 both. So you get two interstates for the price of one, and it really puts San Angelo in a strong position, being at the overlap where two interstates come together, a north-south and an east-west, which would be a great opportunity for freight, and whether you're locating distribution, warehousing opportunities, and whatnot. The key for that really for us, and there's the I-14 map, I'm sure you guys have seen that as well. What has been, give you an idea of what we have coming up, our annual conference is coming up in Lubbock next month. We have we expect about 150 to 200 attendees, and we had our conference, of course, last year in San Angelo. We appreciate the tremendous support from the community, so we hope Lubbock has a lot of pressure to put on as good a show as you guys did here in San Angelo, and we appreciate that support. We'd invite you to come up for this conference as well. We're focusing a lot on trade and then infrastructure improvement with TxDOT and with the freight movement and opportunities. How can we work together to bring that aboard? And I think the best way to help, what can people say, how can we get involved? And that's really the key for our organization, is for having our member communities, and what gives us strength is everyone working together to let our elected officials know that extending I-27 is a top priority for this area. Letting them know that the improvements to this corridor are a top priority for this area, whether it's at the local, state, federal level. When TxDOT, when you meet with the district engineers, let them know that it's a priority, because TxDOT has really become very responsive to community opportunities, and they have meetings where public hearings and there's maybe 20 people there. Well, those 20 people are very influential because you're the ones giving the feedback. And I think what's really more important as well, especially for a project like I-27, it's a generational project. It's a huge project, and so they want to make sure everyone in the region is on board with that. And I know we worked with that, with uniting our organizations, and we turned in hundreds of petitions and signatures and resolutions of support. And I know we had great support here from San Angelo and Tom Green County supporting I-27 extension, but it's also working with all of the mayors and everyone in the area. And I know Mayor Gunter has been working with Mayor Pope in Lubbock and the other West Texas regional mayors to show that sort of unity and support and build that sort of consensus. And how do we overcome the individual priorities for our communities? For example, the oil and gas field traffic, which is overrunning Midland and Odessa, or Amarillo's looking at extending Loop 335 and completing that. Those are priority projects, and we don't want to overshadow that, but how can we look together as a region as a whole and look at a bigger project like the Ports to Plains corridor and the extension of I-27 to have that impact? So that sort of unity is the word I'm looking for. That sort of unity and working together and cooperation has been critical for us. So we appreciate that, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. There's our contact information as well.
Any questions for Michael?
I got a question and a statement kind of going off of what we were able to do up in Washington, D.C. and later of April. When we were up there, we usually heard from everyone that waiting on tax reform to get off the table, the health care bill. Obviously, we're still waiting on that to happen. But for federal designation of how important that is, can you you already kind of touched on the big picture, especially in example of Boise City, taking away from Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and putting money in that little segment why that's so important in that little location.
Yeah, Boise City, Oklahoma is a great example. It's the westernmost, our corridor goes to the westernmost county in Oklahoma, Panhandle, about 1,200 people. So it's not a priority at all for the state of Oklahoma. Compared to I-35 in Oklahoma City, or you look at Tulsa, or the big metropolitan areas. And so it's difficult to get focus on that at a local level, at a state level. And so that's why we look at the role of the federal government and the federal designation, and why that helps us in rural areas, because in and of itself, Boise City is not a priority in the state of Oklahoma. But for the federal to connect these long regions, that's what makes it a big priority. And that's what we're looking at in our federal designation is such projects like that.
One more thing, we were also talking about Midland, how they were more focused on the farm to market roads. What's their attitude at this point?
Well, I think what we've talked to initially is there was some, well, okay, we're okay. I think they're looking at it as we don't want to, we're so, the pressing problem they have, and it's a serious issue, not only for for economic movement of mobility through the area, but also safety. And you look at is the oil field traffic that they're seeing overrun with. There's been some indication that they're okay with looking at the extension down to I-20, and I think once we get to I-20, there's that designation with I-14, so it would be a minimal connection. And I know that's one of the projects that Mayor Gunter's working on with the West Texas Mayor's meeting is kind of building those relationships and kind of building that support. And I think that's really probably going to be the key for us moving forward, is when we get that buy-in from the whole region. I think it's ready to burst and move pretty quick. I think you'll see things move pretty quickly once that happens.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
We're now going to have the presentation of the biannual report from downtown San Angelo. Dell, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Council. Okay, I'm going to start off with a little bit of an economic report. And again, this is covering a period of October, well, actually 2016 to current. Here's a list of businesses that have started working in the downtown district. There are exactly 23 new businesses that started last year through currently. I wanted to highlight a couple of revitalization efforts. The first one is the Mercantile. Most of you probably will remember it as the Harry's Food Store, and originally was the first Sears and Roebuck building in San Angelo back in the 30s. The second one has been the new construction of the First Financial Bank. I know we've talked about that. We're obviously elated that this new construction has become part of our downtown district. The Shannon Clinic, building another major project in the downtown district, and then the revitalization the efforts that are taking place now at the formerly the Roosevelt Hotel, now to be called the Roosevelt Lofts. In the private sector initiative, or funding, excuse me, investments, which includes new construction, permits of renovation, and property sales. The total cumulative from 2007 to June of 30 of this year is $141,469,000. In the private sector, along with public projects, there's another $48 million, rounding it up, for a reinvestment grand total of I'm going to round it up to $190 million. So quite a significant amount of dollars being put into the downtown district. I want to talk a little bit about our promotions. Our new edition of Historic Downtown San Angelo magazine will be coming out in October this year. Our downtown stroll continues. You will see there the little banner, or the banner of the picture. That's an addition that we just added this year of $168,000. And in the Main Street corridor, we saw a 26.4% increase which is about $250,000 in that, in those separate districts.
Is that liquor and sales tax combined? Or
Yes,
just
ma'am.
liquor?
Just liquor.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Dale? Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
We will now have a presentation on the Household Hazardous Waste event hosted by Safe Recycling on June 3rd. And we will have Lloyd Pascal here, or not.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Lloyd.
Good.
Nice to meet you, Mayor. I know a few of you on the board or council members. I'm Lloyd Pascal. I'm the director at Safe Recycling Center. This was our second household hazardous waste collection that the city has helped us host. The first one was most recently, was November 2015. We did have a few less cars this year, but it was also in June, which was much hotter. So I think that there were less people that came out, but we spent $1,400 less than the $50,000 the city gave us to put it. So I sent a check back to the city, reimbursed for the $1,400 that we didn't spend compared to what we had spent last year. We did have a lot of people recycle paint. Latex paint is something that's actually not toxic because it's a water-based paint, and there is a less expensive way of recycling it. That's something I'm going to talk to Shane Kelton and see about maybe having where we have paint collection on latex on a year-round thing, because we were charged just on paint alone was $11,000 out of the total $48,000 for the household hazardous waste collection. And it's actually would have been about $2,500 as opposed to $11,000 if we would collect it year-round at the center. But that's something that I can talk to Shane Kelton, and so that would be get the cost down. But we had a great turnout. Still, we had over 250 cars that came out, people bringing their pesticides and chemicals and stuff like that. And I know a lot of people really enjoy the fact that the city does support us and can use that. And I've had people call and say, when's your next one? I said, at the price that it is, it won't be for about another year, probably maybe October of next year. We're thinking like a year and a half in between or something.
Okay. Do I have questions or from City Council? Lloyd, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
presentation.
I have a question.
Yes.
So can you tell us exactly what the full amount was? You said it was $1,400 less.
The full amount of the bill was $48,597.40. Back in November, we had more people that came through, and it was $49,991.32. But we also had collected more waste in November of 2015 than we did this time. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Any further questions? All right.
Thank you.
We are now going to have a presentation on the actuarial report by Towers Watson on the status of the workers' compensation liability and property insurance program. And we have a presentation by our risk manager, Charles Hagan, and Towers Watson senior consultant, Jason Martin.
Council.
Morning.
I'm Charles Hagan, your risk manager, and every year we do an annual report from the actuarial on what they find as far as what we need to have in funding for our self-insurance. What he's going to do is he's going to give you a run-through of some of the important highlights of that has been found, and it should coincide with the actuarial report that you received earlier. And it's Jason Watson from Willis Towers.
Good morning. I'm Jason Martin with Willis Towers Watson, and thank you for the opportunity to go over the actuarial report with you this morning. This report was completed in 2016. We perform an actuarial report every year. This one was completed in September 30th of 2016, so we're coming up close to the annual cycle in terms of performing the next actual report. In terms of the findings of this report, we'll go through the key overviews or the summary level look at what the findings of the report were. In terms of the limitations that we have here, it's just basically saying that if the city wants to make any decisions, to please do so based on the main report as opposed to this summary document. In terms of the table of contents, we'll go through the current self-insurance program, a little bit of background on the city's program, look through the objectives as well as the findings of the report. So there's a little bit of background in terms of why we're performing this report every year. The city does self-insure several coverages. These coverages are the workers' compensation, general and auto liability, as well as law enforcement, public officials, and property coverage. And so when we refer to self-insurance, if you think about maybe a homeowner's policy or your own personal automobile policy, you may have a deductible on that. So maybe your homeowner's policy might have a $1,000 deductible. So if you have a wind or a hail claim on your roof, if that costs $20,000 to repair, you'll pay the first $1,000 out of your own pocket, and then the insurance company will pay the remaining $19,000 as part of your insurance coverage. Well, the city's self-insurance program is really kind of the same scenario, except in this case, the city is retaining a much larger deductible than what you might see for your homeowner's policy. So in the second column, we show the different retentions or the city's deductibles for each of these coverages. Workers' compensation is a $650,000 deductible or retention. So if you think if the city has a $1 million workers' compensation claim, the city retains that first $650,000, then the insurance company would pay the remaining $350,000. So really,
Is that
yes.
per incident or in total for the year?
That's per claim, so per incident, yes. For general liability and auto liability, that's really an unlimited. There's no excess purchased on those. So in that case, the city retains the full amount of the claim. For law enforcement and public officials, that's capped at $500,000. That's your retention. And then for property, it's essentially a $10,000 deductible. For some of the vehicle and other equipment that are associated with maybe a catastrophe or a specific named event, then it's a $25,000 deductible. So one of what we're really tasked with the objectives of our review is to go through and estimate what is that liability that you're retaining. So within that retained deductible and retention layer, how much should the city set aside so that you have enough funds to pay those claims when they come due? And so we provide two different key, liability estimates for you. One is the unpaid estimate of the loss and allocated loss adjustment expenses, which is essentially just expenses that go along with settling and handling those claims itself. And we provide that estimate as of September 30th of 2016 for claims that have occurred through September 30th of 2016. The next objective and the next piece of information we're providing is the forecasted loss in ALE. In this case, these are going to be for claims that happen during the period from October 1, 2016 through September 30th of 2017. So these are really two mutually exclusive time periods. One is covering all your historical claims up through September 30th. The next is an estimate for any claims that happened during what's really a forecast period at the time that we did the analysis. These are estimates, these estimates are not calendar year numbers. So when we provide the liability estimates, these are amounts that we expect to be paid over maybe the next 12 months, 2 years, possibly up to 30 years. So it's not a calendar year estimate. It's not what we expect to be paid over the next 12-month period. When we go through the findings, you'll see that we're providing these unpaid and forecast estimates on both an undiscounted and a discounted basis. Part of the reason why we do that is because, as we mentioned, that these amounts are not necessarily going to be paid in the next 12 months. In some cases, it could be 20 years before you pay out these liabilities. So you've set aside assets to pay these liabilities, and those assets are earning investment income over that time period. So what we give is a present value estimate, which is the discounted estimate. So it shows that you've set aside these assets, they're earning investment income, so you really don't have to put aside $1 today to pay $1 in the future. You maybe set aside 95 cents. And so you'll see these discounted estimates reflect that present value and the interest income essentially that you're earning on those assets that you have invested.
Why do you do this on a calendar basis versus the budget year that the city works off?
I think that right now the time period matches the insured policy year that's in place. So when the excess insurance kicks in place, is running from a 10/1 to a 9/30. I don't know if there's another reason why we've provided it historically in that particular time frame. If needed, we can provide these estimates at any particular time frame that you need, actually, though.
It would just seem to make sense that it would fall in line with the same way that our budget calendar functions and works, since we budget accordingly.
Okay. So for the discounted rate, so for the discounted rate, we're currently discounting at a 0.621% rate of return, and this is really provided by the city based on the expected return on the assets that are set aside for these liabilities. As we get into the findings themselves, the unpaid estimates, in this case it's as of September 30th of 2016. If we look at column 1, that shows the undiscounted amount. So in total, the liability is about $3.38 million. For workers' compensation, that's the largest piece of $2.5 million. And then for the liability and property estimate, it's about $856,000, with the general liability making up most of that at $515,000.
Now describe this again. So if we're looking at $3,378,000, that is what? So you're saying unpaid estimates, undiscounted. I'm confused. What are we talking about?
Right. Yeah. So what this is it's looking at all the historical claims that the city's had, and it's saying in order to pay all those claims and close them out in the future, you need to. We're expecting that to cost about $3.378 million. So in the future, we're expecting you to pay out $3.378 million to close out all those claims that have happened through September 30th of 2016.
They're claimed but not paid out. Is there reason to believe that that amount will reduce when it's closed out?
It will, yeah. Yeah, so as you pay out those claims, that amount will come down. At the same time, though, you also have new claims coming on the book for the current period. So in this case, we provide a forecast estimate in the next slide where we'll look at how much do we think the claims are going to cost for October 1 of 2016 through September 30th of 2017. So during that 12-month period, you'll have new claims coming on. You'll be accruing additional liabilities at the same time. At the same time that you're paying out these older claims.
So there's a rollover.
There is some, yes. So on a discounted basis, these unpaid estimates come in about $3.26 million. So you have some savings from that, investment income that you're earning. For the forecasted estimates, in this case, these are those happening during October 1, 2016 to September 30th, 2017. In total, we're expecting those liabilities to be about $1.595 million, with workers' compensation making up most of that at about $1 million, and then the liability and property lines coming in a little less than $600,000. On a discounted basis, in total, it's about $1.563 million.
Question.
Yes.
Why would you forecast so much less than actuals were the previous year? If we look at the previous slide where it was 3.378.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. And one thing to clarify is that, so the 3.378 is actually for all historical years through September 30th of 2016. And some of these claims, it can take many years before they're going to be settled. So for workers' compensation, there are still claims that are open from 10, maybe 12 years ago. And it's possible for some claims to stay open 30 years before they're actually closed out. So you have a cumulative effect of many years coming together, and that's the reason why you're seeing this at a much higher amount than what you would for just the forecast year being just a 12-month period, and just claims in that 12-month period. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this forecast period, though, is that, again, it's not a calendar year estimate. We're saying that you would set aside the $1.56 million or $1.595 million today so that you can pay all your claims in the future. Some of it might get paid during this 12-month period, but some of it might not get paid for another 10 years from now. But that's a good question. Thanks for that. The next slide looks at the surplus ratios, and in this case, what we're looking at are the city's assets that are currently set aside in a fund to cover these liabilities. So in column 1 for workers' compensation, the city's fund assets are about $1.725 million to cover those workers' compensation liabilities. The current estimate, however, for those liabilities is about $2.4 million on a discounted basis. So there's a deficit in this case for this fund of $686,000. In column 2, we look at the liability and property, and there's a separate fund set for those coverages. In this case, those assets are to $1.8 million. Our current estimate for those liabilities at September 30th of 16 is about $850,000. So there is a surplus in this case of the $962,000 for that fund. The ratios at the bottom are showing some benchmarks in terms of how much surplus is maybe a reasonable amount or an expected amount maybe within the industry. For the workers' compensation, because of the surplus position being negative, those really aren't meaningful ratios. If you look at the liability and property for the unpaid estimate and the loss forecast ratios, the first two ratios, those are both less than the benchmark of 3. So those are in a favorable position, saying that that surplus is in a favorable position. And then for the retention, the surplus to retention ratio, that's outside of that boundary, but because those first two ratios are at a reasonable range, that's really more of an indication of just the size of the program. There's not a whole lot of claims running through, and just the retention is a fairly healthy retention for the size of the program. It's not to say that you should change your retention. It's just saying that this ratio might not be a good fit for the size of the program.
When you use the word retention, describe what retention is.
Retention is really the deductible, the amount that you're retaining. Are there any questions on this slide itself?
So this goes through the calendar year 2016, what we've just seen. So based off of that, what do you project for the budget year 2017-18?
In terms of where the ratios will be, or just the amount of funding?
Both.
Well, for the ratios, I guess it'll depend if there's any additional, as long as the amounts are accrued based on the recommended levels, and so unless there are any significant changes in the claim experience that would cause us to change what we expect those costs to be for 17-18, the ratio should be similar to what you see here for the liability and property. For the workers' compensation, unless there's some additional funding put in to help true up that surplus level, then you might see these at about the same ratio as well. It could improve a little bit depending on the claim experience that comes through, but I wouldn't expect to see significant changes based on what we're expecting.
Tina, would you please come forward and talk about the workers' comp fund budget?
I have a question for Charles. Since this is a very significant portion of our budget, this liability, what kind of programs do we have in place to kind of lessen this risk?
We do a weekly tailgate training, so we got some training in process. We're reviewing accidents and looking at those at this point in time on a monthly basis in an effort to try to identify what we can do to reduce accidents and injuries.
Do we have is this required? Are workers required to attend these meetings? Or is it on a, if I want to go?
Yes, we asked the supervisors to do a weekly training on a tailgate, and we started that about 2 years ago to encourage safety training as a part of their mission, so they're supposed to do it weekly. Some of them, I know a couple of the superintendents have done daily briefings and things like that, so some of them are reaching out and exceeding what we've started, so we're hoping to try and bring this down a little bit. And,
Jason, whenever we get through with Tina, come on. But I do still have another question for you on the estimated surplus deficit.
Good morning. I was back there trying to pull up the budget for next year when Michael called me forward, so I don't have exact numbers for you. But I can tell you for the current year, we did budget revenue over expenditures for the Workers' Comp Fund of $351,000. And for next year, we budgeted revenue over expenditures of $200,000. So we are actively working to build up those assets due to, as a response to the negative claims experience that we've had.
Actually, she started, was it 2 years ago? Are we in the first year, or we're in the second year,
We are
aren't
halfway
we?
through the second year. About 2 years ago, when we began to experience this, the negative claims, we did change the multiplier. So each individual employee classification has a number assigned to it. That code is multiplied by our multiplier, which then produces the revenue from each of the funds. And so we increased that multiplier a little bit, bumped up what we were retrieving from the other funds to cover the cost of this funding. And so that's how we began to build up that fund balance in the last 2 years.
They chose to try to recover that workers' comp negative fund balance over several years rather than all at once, so that we didn't create a crisis in those other funds.
In the other funds, right.
So let me just ask again. So as it relates to reducing the risk and the number of incidents, how do we formalize and ensure that every supervisor in every area has conducted training and ensure that there is a strategy to change the dynamics?
They're supposed to maintain records of their training, so it would be an
Supposed to.
inspectable.
That doesn't
Yes,
sound
ma'am.
very formal, supposed to.
Yes,
I don't
ma'am.
like that word, supposed to.
Right. They're keeping training records that which we can inspect on.
And how often do we inspect them?
I have not done an inspection.
We're completing an auto safety checklist audit as we speak. In fact, we're working on the report. So one element of what Charles refers to as a kind of a comprehensive effort at reducing these claims is inspecting the vehicle before you take it out on a daily basis. And we're completing an audit on that now, an internal audit. We expect that it will result in some small changes related to that function, but
Further questions?
Yes, for Jason, come talk to us. Tina may have addressed this if I was following what y'all were talking about at the very end there. We show a negative in our estimated surplus on our workers' comp. Is that, Tina, is that specifically what you were answering? Okay, thank you. So we have a plan in place to address that. Okay, thanks.
just as a brief on that, that's a separate fund, and funds which employ have employees make a contribution, in essence, a payroll burden item to the workers' comp fund where the claims are paid. So if you have 3 employees, you'll make a smaller contribution than if you have 30 employees. So it is a payroll, it's not a payroll deduct, it's a payroll burden item that those funds pay to the workers' comp fund. And what Tina meant was we just increased those contributions a small amount so that a larger overall amount would come into the workers' comp fund. And they actually did it with the design that there would be a $300,000 net income at the end of this year to decrease that negative position. And this is actually either the second or third year that they did that. And so they're making progress on the workers' comp fund. They could do it all at once, but it would create a minor budgetary crisis in those other funds. And so we think this is the right way to continue, the right road to continue down, as well as playing good defense, working toward reducing claims.
Strategically, obviously, reducing claims should be the number one strategy. How we shift dollars from one fund to the next to cover the negative number is not high, because it still impacts the overall budget, regardless of how you shift it and compensate from one fund to the next. The big issue is how we shut down and limit and control the number of incidents. And that, to me, strategically is the number one issue, because we can always shift the dollars from column A to column B and cover ourselves from column A to column B. But how do we reduce the number of incidents? And that's got to be a key strategy. Any further questions or need for more information or comments from anybody on the council? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. And then Brian passed out the actuarial report that this presentation was based on, so thank you very much.
All right, we're going to item E, consider adoption of an ordinance authorizing the issuance of City of San Angelo, Texas, general obligation refunding bonds, Series 2017B, appointing a pricing officer and delegating to the pricing officer the authority to approve on behalf of the city the sale of the bonds, the terms of the bonds, and the offering documents for the bonds, establishing certain parameters for the approval of such matters by the pricing officer, leveling an annual ad valorem tax, and providing for the security for and payment of said bonds, providing an effective date, and enacting other provisions relating to the subject. And Tina, you're presenting.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning again, Mayor, Council, Mr. Valenzuela. I have an opportunity here for the city to refund some some bonds that were issued in 2011. They originally issued for interest rates between 4% and 5%. We're looking at refunding is similar to a refinancing of a mortgage or something like that. So we're refunding the bonds at an expected rate of 3.27%, with an expected savings over the life of the issue of about $943,000.
What is the life?
Issued in 2011. I believe those go out to 2036.
And so all right, so we've got the new number, the 3.27%. So on a statistical basis, then that savings would be forecasted in the upcoming budgets versus what would have been in the budget from 2016-17. You know, the screen is flashing really bad.
Oh.
And so if we could just turn it off because it's kind of blinding.
So your question was whether
Well, when we say
that would be
total
reflected
savings
in
over the
upcoming
life.
budget years?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, because I assumed that the number that was in the 2016-17 budget is a different number than what would be in the 2017-18 budget for the same items based off of
We
the
would've- yes,
savings
ma'am.
over that time frame.
We would have budgeted the amount for principal and interest for the upcoming fiscal year, and yes, that amount should decrease based on the refunding. I think it was between $50,000 and $60,000 per year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Vince. You're correct. Okay.
And what were those bonds?
That was the 2011 issue. It was a sales tax, Type B sales tax bond issue. That was for the airport, Concho River Parks, I think some for the auditorium. I have it here. Yeah, some Fort Concho improvements, some fairgrounds improvements, and I think that covered everything that was on this list.
So those will not be paid off until the year 2036.
That's correct. That was the original date for payoff, so it did not extend the life of the bonds.
Do we have questions?
So Tina, you may have said this without saying it. Is this going to impact our INS rate?
Yes, it will, between $50,000 and $60,000 per year in savings over the life of the issue.
And so in terms of cents, dollars and cents.
Well, this is a Type B sales tax bond issue. So it's funded by the Development Corporation.
Okay, so they are servicing the debt.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Just appreciate the fact that you and your team continue to look at these bonds and look for savings. Since I've been on council 15 months, I think this is the third or fourth time that you've come to the council with significant savings because we had reduced rate.
Thank
So
you. We have
appreciate
good support when it comes to that, but we're certainly always open to saving some money.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Tina.
Okay.
We're going to
I
item
think we
F.
do need
Oh, sorry.
action on that one.
Right, we need to.
Move to approve, is it?
Yes, ma'am. The ordinance.
Yeah, there we go. Was there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, I should go back before you vote and ask if there's any public comment. Sorry.
Yeah, there's Steve.
Consider that not a vote.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interfere, but I was curious. This is a very good thing, it seems to me, but are there any finance charges? No mention was made of any charges to do this paperwork.
Tina, will you come forward?
I'm going to ask Vince Vial from Specialized Public Finance to answer that question for us.
Mayor, council members, good morning. My name is Vince Vial with Specialized Public Finance. For the city's financial advisor when it comes to issues of this matter. The cost of issuance that we anticipate to incur on this refinancing is approximately $187,500. Now, all the costs that are related to any financing that a city does are contingent costs upon the transaction being accomplished and meeting these goals or exceeding these goals. So the city has no exposure as far as cost of issuance should this transaction not be accomplished at these levels or better. So all the costs are included in these savings numbers. Any savings numbers that we present to the city are net savings to the city after all costs have been incurred. I hope that answers the question.
So the $187,000 refinancing charge, or if I misquoted that number, is in addition to, would have been on top of the $900 and some thousand savings. So there would have been an initial $1 million plus minus the refinancing charge, and net effect the $900 and some thousand.
Approximately good. Yes, ma'am. That's a good analogy.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Any more further public comment? Then I will ask for a motion again.
The first motion will do.
It'll do? Great, then do we
just
need to revote? And we'll revote, so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Item F, consider approving amendments to the Tiers North and Tiers South incentive policies. And John James, you're on.
Thank you. John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. You may recall a couple of meetings ago where you all looked at the new tiers incentive policies as recommended by the board. You asked us to come back to address this issue of nonprofit organizations. And so, as you know, that was left out of the previous draft, but again, you asked us to bring this back. So we've brought back this simple proposed amendment based on the direction that you all gave at the last meeting, and the text of it is right here, but this would just be added to that existing incentive policy, basically saying that nonprofit organizations may be eligible basically on a case-by-case basis if the board and the city council both find that there's a significant economic impact to that nonprofit improvement. It is worded, just as a note, that providing the funding for the nonprofit would require a supermajority vote of both the board as well as the city council. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And so in the example of the board is opposed to it, but council likes the idea, this would still not allow funding of it unless both entities passed it by a supermajority vote. Obviously, that's up for your consideration, but that's how we've drafted the proposal.
All right, I'm going to say that I'm totally against this. I believe, number one, that it may not apply for tiers funding. And I say that for the following reasons. The tiers program was created for a twofold reason. One, to come up with a fund of money based off of increased appraised values of properties to help facilitate development of new buildings and improve the overall visual appearance of downtown. Today we have over 70 buildings that are still vacant that need work done on them. Number two, the second strategy for the tiers program was always, in fact, to look at it and look at dollars being set aside to improve the overall infrastructure, presence, look of historic downtown. The reason it's not appropriate to include nonprofit organizations is that for businesses that are for-profit organizations, there's no other place to apply for funds that help them improve the visual or other issues required by permits and planning. Redoing a building in the downtown area is a much more expensive project than it is in other areas of town. We, in the historic business district of downtown, a very large percent of real estate is owned by nonprofits. It's one of the largest real estate owned by nonprofits in all Main Street cities in the state of Texas. And the largest number of nonprofits downtown in this city are in the downtown area. We have two wonderful organizations that do an incredible job of providing funds for nonprofits. Almost 100% of their money goes towards nonprofits, and that is the Health Foundation and the Area Foundation. For-profit businesses, those are not areas where they can apply for funds. It's geared towards nonprofits. We must develop downtown. If you remember the numbers that Dale just quoted in terms of performance of downtown, it actually exceeded the performance of the entire city in terms of increases in sales/liquor tax dollars. There's a reason to continue to invest in the downtown businesses and allow them to improve their overall appearance and make it possible for some to actually redo a building and open up a new building. As I said before, we still have 70 buildings downtown that still need work. The expense of redoing those buildings is quite expensive compared to other areas of town. And because, in fact, the funding was never, the creation of the tier zone here in San Angelo or in any other city across the country does not provide for funding for nonprofits. The tiers funds are created by the following mechanism. Improved values put money back into the bank. Nonprofits already contribute to a lot of the real estate downtown, and there are no sales tax dollars going back into the fund from them. And we have a lot of needs for downtown. When you use the word may, we as a city council open the doors to create too much confusion and too much work and effort trying to make a decision about which nonprofit we will or will not fund. It becomes emotional, it becomes personal, it becomes difficult in terms of making the decision. And so I recommend that instead of saying nonprofit organizations may be eligible for tiers incentives, I make a motion that says nonprofit organizations may not be eligible for tiers incentives.
And your motion would include the rest of it as written other than that change?
You would not need the second paragraph, because if you say may not, it covers the issue. It would not be brought forward, so you would not need a 3/4 of all the members of the tiers board or city council. So my motion is nonprofit organizations may not be eligible for tiers incentives. Do I have a second?
I will second that for the following reason. I am not against any particular nonprofit. I like what they do. You have churches, you have the Area Foundation, the Health Foundation. But I don't feel comfortable allowing a tax-based entity that relies on the economic sector of the city to bring in funds to put into the tiers board to improve their overall well-being downtown, to go to others that are not contributing. So I will second that motion.
Do I have public comment?
Steve Hampton. I feel that Well, there are things that, one of the things that you're trying to do is raise appraisal value. And so if you can use this money to increase the value of the property, and that's going to help the city. And now maybe you need a percentage on how much of this money needs to be applied to, the different types instead of but I think it's all for the purpose of moving the downtown forward. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Further public comment, Tony?
I didn't plan on coming up here. I'm on the next item.
Please
But
say your name.
Tony Hunter, and one of the owners of Fifi Dubois downtown, as well as Flamingo Flats. Good morning. I was here for the next item, but I can't help but get involved in this one, because for 10 years we have been a part of downtown. We actually came in right when revitalization was just kicking off. There wasn't a lot downtown. And for us, we've had tiers money on one time for Fifi's and one time for Flamingo Flats, and it's made an amazing difference in our property. We're small businesses. We have no other way to get money for what we need. And trust me, in a historic downtown, every time you turn around every month, there's something that breaks down. That is old, it's 100 years old, and it takes money. In our businesses, most everything, we really don't work for a lot of profit. Everything we profit actually goes back into making that business better and making that property attract more people downtown. So I'm very passionate about the issue, and I think that that money should go, been other cities, downtown Grapevine. You walk through there, and it's open from 8 in the morning until 2 o'clock in the morning. There's constant, steady flow of businesses that are putting money back into that community. And I think that's where Tiers is a wonderful program, and I'd like to see it stay as it is. It means a lot to a lot of us small guys. And I can't even tell you, I feel very strongly about it. Thank you.
Good morning. I need to introduce myself to several of you. My name is Jim Cummings. I'm your newly appointed chairman of the Tiers Board. I want to thank you for affording me the opportunity of serving in this capacity. And I pledge to you my concerted efforts to merit the confidence and trust that you've placed in me. And I promise you that I will be passionate and I'll be proactive in trying to fulfill my responsibilities. I need to go on record with you that first and foremost, I support nonprofits in this city. I serve as a trustee of an organization that we make large contributions to nonprofits here in our city, and that brings great joy to me. But in the role as chairman of the Tiers Board, and serving in that capacity, I need to inform you that fundamentally I am opposed to nonprofits being potential beneficiaries of grants from the Tiers Board. And the reason I take this stance is that to include nonprofits, in my view, as has been stated, creates confusion and it creates conflict with our mission, which is counterproductive in what we're trying to do on the Tiers Board. And in the Tiers responsibilities, we'll strive to promote economic prosperity within the Tiers zones. Secondly, but just as important, we want to grow the tax base within the Tiers zones. And then third, we want to encourage the overall revitalization and redevelopment of downtown San Angelo. Having said that, I want to thank each of you for serving in your capacity, serving our citizens in our city. And I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, council. My name is Terry Giroux, and I work for a nonprofit, but I also agree with most of the speakers that have addressed this problem that we have got to keep putting reinvestment into tax-paying entities. As I say, I work for a nonprofit myself, so I should have maybe a little bit different view of it, but I don't. We have wonderful nonprofit organizations, for instance, that have taken over many buildings that would be derelict, and really are instrumental in revitalizing and reutilizing, if you will, some of these vacant buildings. So it's a wonderful thing that they do, but it also takes them off the tax rolls. And as you can see by the budgets that we have for this city, we need an increase in the receipts for our taxes, our tax rolls. And the way to do that is not to encourage, if you will, reutilization of this reutilization investment by nonprofits. So
Thank you very much. Further comment?
I'm also speaking on behalf of not allowing nonprofits to benefit from the TIERS funds. There are 29 501c status exemptions that any nonprofit can apply for through the IRS, federal government. There's an additional 14 other type statuses that you can apply for, again, as a nonprofit for tax exemptions through the IRS. So there are many other ways for nonprofits to be able to take advantage of creating funds for their ability. Downtown San Angelo is a 501c3. We also had two opportunities when we took donations of two buildings in downtown, significant buildings, in the Roosevelt Hotel and the, I mentioned earlier, the Old Harry's Food Store building. We chose not to apply for TIERS funds just for that particular reason. As a nonprofit, we wanted to make sure that funds were going to be created to replenish those funds. And so obviously those properties have been sold and purchased, and now they will be contributing back to the TIERS funds. So I just wanted to again reiterate, there's a lot of opportunities for 501c3s to be able to gain funds from without having to go through TIERS.
Thank you.
Dale, while you're up here, so if I'm a land bank or something and I want to take and develop something downtown, I mean, let's take anything local out of it, but if I'm looking as an investor or I'm a land bank and I'm a nonprofit and I come here and I look at something downtown I want to improve and I need, you know, the ability to do some funds to it, as this is stated, would that impact me to apply or not apply when my future goal is to actually have something that we can sell and make taxable? So that's kind of my question on this thing is, I know I see everybody's point, Mayor, and I get it, but I want to say, in a bigger picture, does this prohibit somebody from looking at us down the line and saying, I would develop that property, but I don't think I can get the assistance from the city to develop that property, or they're not going to support me? And that was my whole thing when we brought this up a couple of weeks ago, was does it keep other people from coming to us if they eventually want to develop some property, and they are a nonprofit at that time, but the property is eventually going to be taxable and provide an economic incentive?
Well, as Dale just said, there are many options. If it's a nonprofit to begin with, they have a whole laundry list of areas to go for funding, including locally the Health Foundation and the Area Foundation. Businesses for profit have no place to go except to a bank, and most banks say, you know what, it's going to cost an awful lot of money. What we have never had a problem with is that scenario. What we've had a problem with is people looking at buying a building and developing it because of the cost. And historic districts are that most creative energy, entrepreneurial spirit that exists in downtown. And we have to make sure our historic downtown is successful, and it requires TIERS support to do that. There are so many avenues, and I repeat again, the Area Foundation and the Health Foundation give 100% the Health Foundation gives 100% of their funds to nonprofits. They're a source. If I want to open up a coffee shop, the Health Foundation is not a source for me. They have multiple levels on multiple levels of places to go to make that concept happen. A business for profit does not.
And also, in that scenario that you just spoke about, and if they're buying a building, whether it's historic or non-historic, depending on the age of the building, and most of our buildings in downtown would qualify for either federal or state historic tax credits. That's another avenue for the scenario you just described in order to be able to tap into those types of resources.
Okay, you've answered my question there, and I guess I get it down to the point that I'd figure under supermajority going through two different committees or councils to review, you know, basically 12 out of 14 people would figure that one out and shut it off before it gets there. But you've answered my question.
Yeah, the other part of it that I think we haven't emphasized enough is the conflict issue. You know, you put a board and put city council on an emotional level when you've got someone coming up to say, well, we're doing this for the children, or we're doing this for whatever the cause is. And, you know, who wants to turn that down? Well, nobody does. So that eliminates, and this is, again, a tiers, it's not a funding agent for
called
nonprofits.
tax increment refinance zone. That's the reason it's called tiers.
So you eliminate having to face that as a tiers board member and as a city council, and that's another element that I think we need to emphasize as you.
And I think that's a good element that you just mentioned. However, I think it does get emotional because we're really focused on downtown San Angelo and what happens there. But if I remember correctly, there's a South Tiers and a North Tiers, right? So in the North Tiers, there are different needs than there are in the South Tiers. And when we have a policy, you know, one of the things that I grew up with was never say never, because you don't really know what's going to happen or what's going to go forth. And to Tom's point, I agree with him 100%. With it going through a couple of boards before a decision is made, I think that's a check and balance on it. Plus, it gives us the opportunity to consider. It doesn't say that nonprofits will you know, have a chance for funds. It said they may. And that gives us an opportunity to look at things, because we don't know what changes are going to occur. And you stated that there are 29 avenues that nonprofits can go to. How do we know those 29 will always be there? And maybe there's a situation going on in the North Tiers that, you know, could use some funding from Tiers. So I just think that we need to step back and not just look at it so black and white. And I understand what you're saying, and Mayor, I understand what you're saying, that we need, not just we want, but we need properties to go on the tax rolls so that it can be reinvested into our city. But I think we ought to leave an opportunity, if there is something that comes along that we need to consider for Tiers funding. And this gives us that opportunity. And I also understand the point you made that, you know, if I come and the Tiers board and the city council allow me to have funding, and then another nonprofit comes along and we deny funding, that could create conflict within the city, and we certainly want to avoid that at all costs. And so I guess what I'm saying is, in saying all that, is I understand both sides, but I just hate to say never to this policy amendment. And I just think that gives us an opportunity to make decisions. And I think we as a board, that's what we were elected to do, to make tough decisions. It's not always easy.
You're exactly right about that, Councilwoman DeWitt. I did want to just, this is IRS status exemptions. There are 29 and an additional 14. So there's 42 total exemptions that a nonprofit can take advantage of in terms of being able to create funding resources or tax credits or whatever that are available to 501c3 or any nonprofit organization, whatever their issues or whatever their status is. And this is relatively, in the big picture, the funds, especially for the South tiers, are much smaller than the Northern tier funds. The Northern tier right now, I think, sits at 1.5 million. Am I correct? Somewhere in that area. And the Southern tiers typically stays within $400,000 to $500,000 that would be available. And so the Northern tiers, if you're concerned about the Northern tiers, has considerable amount of money available to it. And the other issue is there's a low amount of applications that are coming in for funding from the North tiers, from those businesses that would be eligible. And that's one of the reasons why. So I understand what you're saying, but I still don't, I still think very clearly that if we continue to utilize tiers funds for nonprofit status, and those funds are not going to be replenished because they don't have to be replenished because of their status, we lose at the end of the day.
I would like to mirror what Councilwoman DeWitt said. I'm very much for the fact that you don't know how things are going to be in the future. And for us to make this definite decision of, no, we're not going to ever approve a nonprofit. I'd like to see it, especially because of the North Side, that they do not have a lot of applications. Maybe this would help the nonprofit and the North Side come across and say, hey, we're going to apply, we're going to do this. But I do not like the fact that we have to go up there and say, no, we're not going to do it completely.
Well,
That's
they
my
have
take on
been
it.
they have been eligible to apply.
I'm sure, but
and
if we
they
say no
haven't.
now,
Right.
then they will definitely be out of the ballgame. And that's where I think that, like Ms. DeWitt said, we were elected to protect the people in our district, and it's not just about downtown; it's about other places in town.
And I'm not saying it's just about downtown. I'm saying that the Northern tiers has an abundance
know
of
how much
funding.
money they have.
Right. Okay. And so, relatively speaking, they can and have been available to those funds, and they haven't taken advantage of it. But the point, again, that I'm making and Downtown San Angelo is making is that when you take those funds out, they're not going to come back. And we need those funds available for those
understand that.
businesses. Thank you.
Tony, you want to comment again?
John, at some point I'm going to have a question for you.
One thing about the northern tiers, because we've been able to do a couple of things. I think there's also an informational, educational aspect to the tiers board that needs to go out to the businesses on the north side. I've been approached by several, say, how do you do it? How do we do this? How can we do this? And I said, sit down, write up the things you want to do to improve your business, things that you need. Write it down, and let's look at it. I'll be more than happy to show you where to go. We'll set you down in front of the right people and get it done. There are a lot of people, I think, up there that would love to make their business a better place. And it needs a lot of work. So there's money available. So I'm encouraging those folks, do what we did. Get in there. But there is information that needs to be shared and education on the matter. And I think that would change a lot of just this bunch of money here. I think there's a lot of folks out there that would love to have it.
The other issue for nonprofits, or if I should say for nonprofit organizations, is someone can redo a building and apply for tiers funding. They then can lease to a nonprofit organization. Most nonprofits won't spend the money on a historic old building because it's so expensive, and they're not going to spend those kinds of funds on a downtown building and the cost associated with it. More often than not, someone else owns the building and leases it to a nonprofit. So there are many different aspects of that. Yes, Roland.
Mayor and City Council, my name is Roland Pena, Director of Economic Development. I just felt compelled to make some comments. I really don't, I mean, this is not my not my issue, not under my purview, but I felt like I needed to provide some input, some insight with regard to a broader perspective, economic development perspective. TIERS provides assistance for public purpose. And just to give you an example of a nonprofit, the City of San Angelo Development Corporation is a nonprofit, and we work very closely with Neighborhood and Family Services, who provides services for us to rehabilitate neighborhoods. And we do that by providing affordable housing, of which the majority of cost is provided by the Development Corporation. That in turn provides an individual the ability to afford a home. And it helps to revitalize a neighborhood. I think the only concern that I have is that the nonprofit terminology may exclude city government, other nonprofits that are able to help for a public purpose. I see a day when this community may have more than 1 or 2 tiers, that we can have one in different portions of the city so that we can revitalize other neighborhoods. The city can take advantage of tiers to help build other public purpose buildings, for example. I mean, tiers can be used for fire departments, medical facilities, or first aid facilities, paramedic facilities, parks. And I think that what we're talking about is revitalization and creating vitality. And when the term is, if we beget that, then that in itself begets itself and continues to revitalize. I think that's what we're talking about. I would just hate to exclude those entities like city government or the City of San Angelo Development Corporation that can help revitalize other parts of the city, and that's my only comment.
You have separate funding for that purpose.
That is correct. But
That does not
but when we collaborate, when we can collaborate, just like we're talking about the Chadburn project, it's a multi-million-dollar project, and it will beget revitalization, and I think the city benefits from it.
The city, of course, is a nonprofit, but it's a 501c8, right? You want to describe what a nonprofit 501c8 is versus a 501c3?
Maybe Teresa.
I can look it up for you. Would you like me to do that?
But most government
A 501c8, let me, is fraternal beneficiary society and associations. So the government, I looked into that. City government is not a 501 anything. It is tax exempt, but under the IRS, but it does not qualify as a 501 status.
Nonprofit.
Right, it's not a nonprofit.
Tax-exempt taxing organization, but it is not
It's
a
not a
nonprofit.
nonprofit. So that's a misunderstanding right there.
Correct.
City is not
A nonprofit.
a nonprofit.
It's a tax-exempt organization.
Well, I think there's you need to distinguish those two, because we are a nonprofit, because we are not for-profit. We do not have a tax designation under 501c.
Right.
So John and I were just talking about if we're going to let the governments, or the city especially, receive these funds, we probably want to change the nonprofit organization language to be more the tax designation versus just the general statement of nonprofit organizations.
So are you saying we should say nonprofit organizations who do not have a taxing element?
I don't think it'll be that easy either, because you can be an organized nonprofit under Texas statutes without being a 501c3 under the IRS code. So we would have to make sure that, how I would write this if we want to make sure that governmental entities are included in getting TIERS funding, is that we would explicitly state that it does not apply to governmental entities.
Okay.
John, I have a question for you. There's, I'll say, obviously passion on both sides of this. Sometimes I think we need to step back just a couple of steps. I don't know what I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. But help me here. Are there some unintended consequences either way of this issue that we do need to consider before we ultimately take a vote?
Well, probably, I think is the short answer. There may be some unintended consequences, and I think some of those have been raised. Tom raised one that in other cities, Abilene, for example, there's a nonprofit whose sole purpose is to purchase properties, rehabilitate them, combine parcels, and then basically flip it to encourage redevelopment. In that case, an organization like that that's a nonprofit wouldn't be able to get funds. I don't know that that's a huge problem because they could find a different mechanism, or they could consolidate the property and resell it and then have the new owner apply for funds. I do want to make 2 points, though. You talk about north versus south. As you may recall, when we adopted the new policies, we split what used to be one policy into two. So there's now a north policy and a south. So one option could be to include different language in the north versus the south. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing is this policy is specifically for the incentive grant program. Something like the Chadburn Street Improvement Project does not fall under this program. So when we're thinking about funding city projects or other things, there are other ways that the TIERS funds can be expended other than through this incentive program. This is specifically for a grant program where people apply under this particular policy. So I don't want anyone to go away thinking that what's written in this policy applies to the entirety of TIERS funding opportunities.
John, let me see if I got you correct. You're saying that the north side could say that the nonprofits were eligible, and the south side could say, no, they're not eligible.
Correct.
Okay. I like that idea.
Before you run away, John, I think I'm probably the only one up here that hasn't spoke, and this all started a couple council meetings ago right in the middle of my district. So what I want to say is that it's very difficult in the south because there's not as much funding there. I think we have to find a way to get more businesses downtown, to grow that particular fund. If we had $1.5 million in the South Fund, I don't know that we'd be having this long discussion about nonprofits up here, because I think we would have dollars enough to do what we needed to do on a regular basis. So splitting this may be an opportunity. The other thing is as we look at this, and Tom Thompson just said it, if you do a supermajority on two separate boards, that means 12 out of 14 people have to agree that it's a project that meets public need and is good for the community. So there's a possibility that we could stay that particular way if we decided that's what we wanted to do. We just have to figure out a way in the South Zone, majority of the downtown area, how we're going to increase that tax base, not only for the TIERS funding, but also for the sales tax. And we have got to figure how we're going to get people in those 70-plus buildings. And ever since I've been coming to these council meetings about 5 or 6 years ago, we've been talking about that particular item. And we've been some successful in a few instances. But we've got to find a way, and I don't know whether that means somehow or another we strategically sit down and look at that from an entire community and not just the downtown association, but we've got to figure that out, because if we don't, the South Zone is always going to have no money, regardless of whether or not it goes to a nonprofit or not. So however we decide here this morning on this particular issue, I think the larger issue simply is this. We've got to get people in those buildings, and we've got to revitalize the downtown to increase that tax base.
Let me ask this may be the firestorm question, at least in my mind. Let me go ahead and ask it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Has a conversation ever taken place since we've had North Zone, South Zone tiers? Has a conversation ever taken place? Why don't we just have a tiers and not a north and a south?
Yes.
I think I understand why There is two, but I'm wondering if we had one, would that, if we only had one tiers, the boundaries of those respective not being any different than they are, but it was just all one pot, would that help any in this discussion?
I think that's
think,
for another
Tommy-
day and another time.
I'll just
Absolutely,
say
'cause-
that conversation has been had.
We
And
can't.
it will set off a firestorm.
We-
Absolutely will, because as Tony, when she was speaking, said that people are not coming forward from the north tiers to apply for the funds. That's why the funds are building up so much. And education and encouragement and getting people on the north side to start applying for some of those funds is important. And I think that, as has been said here, because the South Fund doesn't have as much money as the North Fund, if we make it one fund, then the North is not going to get anything. So I just, as the mayor said, maybe that's a conversation for another day, and I'd really like to prepare for that. So I'm just saying, I guess there's a motion and a second on the floor for this?
Yes.
May I, Mayor? I'd
Yes,
like to
you
make
may.
comments. I do want to make the comment that as far as tiers monies, we do know there's a finite amount of money. There's not a huge pocket available to us. So when you start looking at reinvestment in that area, this is just my opinion. When you look at reinvestment in the area, and we talked a little bit about and I'll bring this up, the Pocket Park last time, that if you invest in that nonprofit, that it possibly promote investment in that area. But because there is a finite amount of money, the question becomes a question of opportunity cost. If you invest in a project that's considered indirect, which would be like a nonprofit, the Pocket Park, are you foregoing the opportunity of investing in a direct reinvestment type project where you're actually building the tax base? And not only that, when you're investing in that direct impact type of investment, you're already encouraging investment in the area because you're encouraging that directly into that business, the for-profit that actually is building a tax base. So again, for me, it does become a question of indirect and direct, and also opportunity cost. As you invest money, if you put it toward a nonprofit, that takes away from the possibility of investing in a for-profit that's actually building a tax base in that area, and also contributing again back into that incremental amount that can be reinvested later. So for me, when I look at that, I do understand that for if you look at a project by project and say, okay, are we going to consider investing in that one? You got to ask yourself, what is the loss that we may incur from that? Do we lose that money in the future to invest in a for-profit? And again, a for-profit that would have an impact both ways, building the tax base and also encouraging investment in that area. So again, we don't have much. I wish we had a lot of money, and I wish that we could go and look at each particular project and say, hey, can we look at that nonprofit as an indirect contribution to that area, or should we wait for a direct contribution with a for-profit? And that's just my thought on it.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion on the floor and a second.
Let's hear the motion, because there's been a lot of
Well,
discussion. We've talked about
I'll be
splitting
glad-
these things up, and I want to make sure I know what I'm voting for.
Do I need to restate it as I stated it, or can I reword it?
You can reword it. We'd have to have an additional second if you want to include the information related to government entities, that sort of stuff.
I'm going to make a motion that nonprofit organizations, with the exception of governmental entities, may not be eligible for tiers incentives in the southern tiers zone. Do I have a second?
And that's an amendment of your
That's
motion.
amendment.
Is there an amendment of the second?
Was the original just Southern or for both North and?
It was both. I'm just doing the southern right now.
Second.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. The motion passes 7-0. And now we can take additional motions on this subject.
I would like to make a motion. I would like to make a motion that nonprofit organizations may be eligible for tiers incentives in the north zone if the tiers board and city council make a finding that a significant economic impact will be created as a result of the project.
Is that with the 3/4 of all the members of the tiers board and city council voting for it?
Providing funding for a nonprofit organization under this policy shall require a favorable vote of at least 3/4 of all the members of the tiers board and city council.
So as written for the north tiers.
Exactly.
Yes.
Brian, does she need to be specific about not allowing for in the South District? Is that just fine the way that she stated it?
Well, I think as long as she's specific for the north tiers as written for
As
the
written.
north
Okay.
tiers.
Yes.
Okay.
We're good.
I can second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Passes 6-1. And I think everyone says we need a break.
We do.
Moving to G, could I move J forward, which would be the first reading and public hearing of an ordinance amending Chapter 5, Article 5.02, Alcohol and Beverage Regulations of the City Code of Ordinances to add a minimum 300-foot separation for the sale of any alcoholic beverage, liquor, beer, wine, or vinous liquor from a church. John, you're on.
Thank you. Again, John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This is an item that you may recall at a previous city council meeting, maybe 6 months, even a year ago. The issue came up about separation of bars from churches. That is something, as you see on the screen here, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Code, basically the state allows cities to say alcohol sales have to be separated from churches. However, we don't currently have that separation restriction in our ordinance. We do separate from schools and hospitals, but our current ordinance does not require a separation from churches. We looked at other cities, the 10 cities you see on the list here. All 10 of them have the separation requirement for alcohol sales from churches, but as I said, we do not currently have that. This is a district map that shows areas of town where alcohol sales are allowed, and so that would affect that particular item in that area. And so here's the proposed language, basically adding to where we say alcohol sales cannot happen within 300 feet of an elementary or secondary public school, or it would add church to that list as well. So a fairly minor amendment to the ordinance, but it would potentially have an impact out in the community. I will note that we have proposed exempting the CBD, the downtown, since there's a lot of different things happening in close proximity. There's already bars and churches literally across the street or next door. We didn't want to impact that type of activity in the downtown where you expect things to be in closer proximity. So this would apply outside of the downtown. Again, that's that exception for the central business district. So this does come to you from the Planning Commission with a recommendation for denial. That was a 4-2 vote by the Planning Commission. Per the zoning ordinance, when the Planning Commission recommends denial of a text amendment to the ordinance like this, it does trigger the supermajority requirement for City Council. So to approve this amendment to the zoning ordinance would require a 3/4 majority vote by the council.
John, could you go back to a couple of slides back where you had the red drawn and say again what you said?
My understanding is that is the area within which alcohol sales are allowed generally, that those areas are eligible for liquor permits without the restrictions that apply in other parts of the city.
So anything that does exist within those zones would become a legal non-conforming use. Is that an accurate statement?
That's correct. As with any of our, or most of our zoning requirements, if you're in existence now, you're allowed to continue. And so if there is currently a liquor store or bar within 300 feet of a church, they would be allowed to continue as a non-conforming use.
And if they ever stopped that use and it was stayed that way, is it 12 months?
Correct.
Then they would be subject to the
That's
300
correct.
foot.
That's correct.
Okay.
So if I sell my business, or if I want to sell my business and somebody wants to own my liquor business, I cannot sell my business.
No, the business can be transferred as long as it's in operation and doesn't cease operation for more than 12 months. You can sell it, you can close
So
down
for
and open
1
it up.
year, you-
Correct.
Okay.
But if you miss the 1-year window, then it's gone.
Correct.
And downtown is excluded from this conversation.
That's correct.
Has there been public comment, public input? Did we ask any of the public their perspective on this? And then repeat to me again, is this a current Texas law ordinance? You said something about the state of Texas early on.
The state law allows cities to adopt this regulation, but does not require it. And so we have not taken advantage of that opportunity. But
is this one of few things that they allow you to have an opinion on? Because we want to have an opinion. This is going to be one of very few we ever get an opinion on. I want everybody to speak up today.
So we need to be careful what we have an opinion on.
Yes.
John, you said the Planning Commission denied the amendment to the ordinance to include churches where schools and hospitals are. Why was that? I mean...
Well, and partly to answer the mayor's question, there was quite a bit of discussion. We've reached out to folks who have spoken on this before or have expressed an interest, and there was some interest at the Planning Commission. So we've tried to get the word out on this so that anyone interested can come forward. There was quite a bit of discussion at the Planning Commission. I think their feeling was that it was just too restrictive. We have lots of churches, and if we were to say that liquor sales were not allowed within 300 feet of a church, that would significantly diminish the opportunities for that type of business, and that on the whole, I'm trying to speak for the commission here, but on the whole, that there have not been significant problems with that, with maybe a handful of exceptions, only the one that we're really aware of that was brought up at a previous city council meeting. So I think trying to summarize what the Planning Commission's feeling was that it just wasn't a problem that needed to be fixed. Again, it was a 4-2 vote, so 2 of the commissioners felt that it was something they would approve.
So now, I know the mayor asked for confirmation on this. I'm asking, it would exclude the downtown area?
Correct.
This change would. So it would apply to businesses that are in the residential areas of town?
Yeah, everything outside of downtown, this would apply to.
Well, when we talk, let's be clear, Billy, because one of the things we need to make sure is when we talk about downtown, we want to talk about the downtown district. So meaning define downtown based off of this ordinance, because we have many different ways we talk. Northern tiers, southern tiers, we have a Main Street district, we have a central business district, we have many different languages and terminologies. So what we need is clarification, John, on specifically when we say it excludes downtown. Tell me the territory it excludes.
Well, it's the central business zoning district, and so I unfortunately I don't have a map of that on the presentation, but it's basically what you think of as downtown, basically the freeway down to the river, roughly. I don't know if it ends at Konigheim or Abe, but roughly there over to about Main Street.
The river on the west, yeah. So when you hear downtown present, Billy, they talk about the 16-block territory downtown. That is the territory, inclusive of all those bars that would already be in existence in that district.
John, this basically came about a year or so ago because of one particular bar that was in proximity to a church, and this particular bar's patrons were evidently not very respectful to that property on that church, and that's why we started having this conversation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
This is one instance, one particular bar I wonder how many times the police officers have responded to that particular site. I know Chief Howard was here earlier and would have been able to answer that question, but unfortunately he's not right now. So I think if we've got one particular area that's a problem, it's going to be difficult for me to blanket the whole community with an ordinance. So at least that's my comment right now.
How many businesses, I don't know if I asked this before, how many businesses does this impact outside the downtown district, business district?
We have not tried to do an analysis of where all of the churches and all of the liquor sales permits are within the city. That's a pretty big undertaking. So we have not tried to look at that.
So Harry, to your point of from where it originated, did that arise again this year, that particular situation arise again this year that now prompted it at this point in time?
No, the short answer is when that came up at the time, the city council said, hey, this is something we should look at. We put it on our to-do list, but it's just now we've gotten to it.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
So basically, we have one church, one bar that has created an issue that now is brought before us because of one bar, one church in the entire city of San Angelo that is problematic. And so we're trying to create an ordinance based off of one bar, one church.
I believe Reverend Davis was the one who had come up here before and mentioned that bar that was on MLK. That's right across the street from that church.
That's right. And so I believe there may be public here to speak, at least on that side and perhaps the other side of the issue as well.
Any more questions for John? Does anyone want to make a motion? Will we do public comment after we have a motion? Sorry. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve as presented.
And when you move to make a motion to approve it, you are making a motion that says that we would protect churches from bars that are 300 feet within that church's real estate. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And I will second that motion.
May we have public comment? Good morning.
Good morning,
Sorry you
Mayor
had to
and
wait
staff.
so long.
Huh?
Thanks for hanging
Oh,
in
no,
there with us.
I'm a very patient man. I have more patience than I have money.
Most of us do.
My name is Charles Davis, and I just happen to be the pastor of St. Paul Baptist Church. The church is not 300 feet away from the bar. The bar is here to that mirror back there. That's not 300 feet.
What is 300 feet? If I'm in this room,
Football field, length of a football field.
Okay.
And there's no way in the world that bar could be 300 feet from the church. When you walk out the church, the bar is right there. And from what I understand from the history that I've received, is a young lady got killed at that bar 2 years ago. Several people always park in our church parking lot. I've even had people park in my personal parking space in the church parking lot. And I really don't think that that's good. And it's in a residential area. And not only is it across the street from St. Paul Baptist Church, but it's also right beside Alexander Temple, which is another church. That shouldn't be. I'm a little upset because the guy who supposedly run the bar, he bragged about how he got the bar. He even bragged to me that he paid $15,000 extra to have that bar put there. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it should be investigated that this man has a bar across the street from the church and that he thrives on, that God allowed him to do it. No, not the God I serve. The God I serve would never allow me to put a bar across the street from a church. I respect the church very highly. It's sad that our children have to see this bar. There's a school right down the street from our church. And again, there's always somebody parking in front of the church. And when I ask them to move, and they tell me, well, the church is closed, the church ain't never closed. There's handicap signs that are there. You go to Walmart at 12 o'clock at night, you can't park in a handicap parking space. But yet you come to the church and you park in front of a handicap parking space. You're not respecting the church. All we're asking is that you respect the church. I understand that there's bars and around churches downtown. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Most of the bars that you see downtown are restaurants. This is not a restaurant. This is a bar. Pool tables, bright lights, friendly pub. Pub is another word for bar. I came last year by myself, but I brought one of the members with me today. Come on. I would have brought some more, but I just found out yesterday that this was coming up. And we're very serious about our church. I think, if I'm not mistaken, our church had been in that area for 60-something years. Our church is 121 years old. So we have some history here in the neighborhood. And again, it's not downtown. If it was downtown with the rest of the churches, I wouldn't even be complaining. But it's in a residential area, and it's not respected.
You realize if that building and that business already exists, whatever we vote for today won't change that, because it will be grandfathered in.
I understand. I understand
and I'm saying that out loud to make sure we all understand that.
I understand the grandfather law, but at the same time, I understand God's law, and that's against God's ordinance. And so however long it take me to fight for that building to be moved, I'm taking a stand. I'm asking not only myself, but I'm asking my congregation to do the same thing. Not only the congregation, but the whole community, because it's the only bar in our community, and it should not be. It should not be. I don't think that there's a bar at your church.
There is not.
Thank you. I get.
We'd all like to change things in life. The unfortunate part is whatever we decide today won't change that bar, and that's the. I'm just speaking out loud because I know what you're saying, and I'm passionate. I understand you.
I really do. I respect what you're saying, and it was there, and I understand the grandfather law, but at the same time, I understand that in 2018, it ends, and so I'm coming back. And hopefully, I'm not coming back by myself. It would be more of us the next time we come. You want something to say, sister?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I can tell she's ready to talk. Come on.
Hello, Council. My name is Michelle Chin. I am a member of St. Paul Baptist Church. I've been there for 17 years now. I have a child that attends St. Paul Baptist Church since we've been here. And we have children, young children that attend St. Paul Baptist Church. We believe strongly about the separation between the church and bars, just like everybody else. And we believe in our children attending church and that they should be safe and protected against things such as bars and that kind of thing. And you know, it's hard to protect your kids as it is, and then if you have a bar across the street, you have to worry about the bar. And when we come to church for Bible study and you see adults outside, they can drink outside. You know, we see them drinking and we can hear the music, and it's just not Christian, and we're Christians, and we try to uphold that, and we try to build that in our children, and we try to build upstanding citizens for the community. And that's all we want to do. And we do understand that it takes time to have this ordinance come about. We just want you to hear what we're saying to you. We'd like you to consider that strongly, and that we be considered in that, just like you would any other church in any other bar situation. And like the pastor said, other churches have that. We would like to have that considered as well. And
St.
so
Paul I'm sorry.
we just thank you for your consideration.
Thank
St.
you.
Paul is a very historical church, and we just want to be recognized as being as a historical church in our community. It's one, matter of fact, St. Paul is the oldest church in the community. It's 121 years old.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and matter of fact, this October we will celebrate that 121 years. So it's not just a church that was just put there. There's some history there, and we want to keep that history going. And like Sister Chin said, you know, when we go to Bible study and our youth are doing a car wash or what have you, you know, we have to pick up beer bottles from our church ground. And that shouldn't be. And for me, that's very painful that people don't respect the church. And these are not tears of weakness. These are tears of sadness because people have lost respect for the church. And I'm not going to allow that to happen. And so it doesn't matter how many times I have to come here. I'm coming. And I'm going to keep coming in the name of Jesus. I'm coming.
Thank you.
Until somebody make a change. It's
So let
time
me-
to make a change.
So let me ask you this, Reverend.
Yes,
You,
sir.
you said that particular location, that church had been there for 60-some years? Is
Yes,
that, is my understanding of what you
If
said?
I'm not mistaken, yes.
Yes,
All right.
it has.
So I think as we take a look at this, and Mayor, you said this very appropriately, both of those entities have existed in the same spot for a number of years. And so I'm not sure whatever decision we make today is going to impact that. But I also feel like that the parishioners of this particular church have a valid issue with that particular establishment because the patrons of that bar over there are not respecting the people from this church and the church property. So I think we really need to see whether or not, again, I go back and say what I said earlier. I don't know how many calls for service the police department has made to that particular establishment, but maybe if we put more pressure on the people that own that place, maybe we could help clean up some of that stuff.
I so appreciate it.
I think
I
we're
really
going to have
do.
to use the law and whatever code enforcement issues we can find to help protect your church property and the value of your Christianity and what happens in that church, because I don't think we can pass a vote today that will impact you, and that's the unfortunate thing, but it won't. But if we make it uncomfortable enough that the people attending that bar don't feel comfortable attending it anymore, then perhaps we can change the dynamics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. You too.
Thank you.
Do I have further,
I'd have to ask a question,
Sure.
Brenda. If we needed more information on this, one of the questions that was asked, and I think you asked it of John, is how many of these places in San Angelo are within that 300-foot radius of church and a bar? I'd rather postpone a vote on this thing personally until we got information that allows us to say, all right, this is one instances, or we've got 30 instances in this particular community.
I'll just note, we can do that. That's a fairly significant undertaking. There's not a good, we don't have a layer on our GIS, for example, of churches, so we'll have to do some research the Yellow Pages or Googling online to get a good list of the churches, which we may not have. Same with bars. It's definitely something we can do, but
Well, I mean, from my perspective, if this is a problem throughout the community, then I may be tending to vote one way. If it's a single issue, then I'd like to have the police department take care of it, and I may vote a different way.
sure.
I ask again, do we have any other issues with any other churches with this problem?
Not that I'm aware of.
Me.
This is the one complaint that we've received.
Sorry, Mayor, we can look at police reports and pull what complaints have been received for certain bars, certain pubs, and see if in fact maybe there's a church nearby, and maybe do it that way so that John and staff isn't buried with a lot of research, but really we want to find out how many issues or problems really are out there. So if the complaints have been had with certain bars, we can take a look at that and see how close the churches are to that bar establishment.
I believe strongly in public property rights, so I believe if someone's had a business in a location and it's a bar, whatever, that it's hard to change the dynamics and tell them one day you can't, it's going to be an issue if I sell it. On the other hand, I'm very protective of, and obviously at some point so was the law in an interesting way that it prohibited from schools and hospitals, but not churches. I find that amazing that something was passed that excluded churches to begin with. That's odd. I'm not sure the logic behind that, because I would have thought that the church and the schools would have been the most protected elements, not hospitals. So that's an interesting thing for me. But I don't think we can pass something today that has an all over the city dynamic that would change the dynamics of
Mayor, allow us,
what?
I'm sorry.
No.
I said, Mayor, allow us to research it. We can actually bring it back for consideration. Harry mentioned that he'd like to have a little more research on that. We can definitely do that and bring that back. But again, if we're not prepared with the information that we have, I just do recommend that we just kind of bring it back next time around.
I would like to say that this is more, for me, it's more like something that's in the future. Say, for instance, if this bar was to close down, or any bar that is by a church, it would prevent them, if it has been lapsed a year, that they would not be able to reestablish in that location. And that's where I see this benefiting everyone.
And that's what it says now, right?
No, this is not in.
Right, you said that if I sold my bar to somebody, if they didn't open it up before 1 year, they could not open a bar there. They have 1 year to buy it from me, open it back up under their name, their TBAC license, period.
Right. Assuming that you're outside the CBD, then that's correct.
Yeah.
So John, what would prevent somebody from going and opening up a church and then actually affecting somebody that has an establishment that sells alcohol, whether that be a chain restaurant or something else? That would also apply to them over a period of time, correct?
It would. Again, if the alcohol sales already existed, they would be grandfathered. But yeah, that has happened in the past where you have a bar and maybe the church moves in next door, and that would create a similar non-conforming situation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, I think we had a motion on the table, so what we need to do is to ask if we can pull that motion. Can I do that?
If it's decided that you want to spend some time and deliberate it and bring it back at a future meeting, then we would need the second and the motion rescinded. Otherwise, we need to deal with the motion on the floor.
So I'm gonna ask to see if the person who made the motion and the second would like to rescind that motion and that second and move to a later date with more information, this conversation.
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that.
Yes, I will rescind my second.
We will tell you, John, go to work.
Okay.
Thank you for being patient with us today and hanging out. We're sorry it took so long to get to you. Okay?
Thank you.
Job well done.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to go back up to item G, and it is consider resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a temporary, non-exclusive sidewalk use license agreement for 280 square feet of landscape planters, seating areas, and an existing porch and canopy, and 320 square feet of seating areas, awnings, and an electric smoker to be located within the right-of-way of Oak Street for properties located at 204 and 208 South Oaks Street. John?
Thank you. Again, John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This is a sidewalk use agreement on Oak Street. Currently, Peepsy's Barbecue is the tenant in this building. And as you mentioned, these are the things that they've asked to allow encroaching into the public right-of-way onto the sidewalk. The staff is recommending approval of the proposal with the exception of the electric smoker, and I'll get to that in just a second. This is the survey of the area, just defining what areas they will encroach. I will note that as with any such encroachment where it involves a sidewalk, particularly in the downtown, we would always maintain a clear path for pedestrians and wheelchairs, and so that won't be an issue in any case. This is a picture of the site. This is the smoker in question. Again, the staff is recommending approval for the awnings, the seating outdoors, and all of the other things they're asking for, but we have recommended not including the smoker for a number of reasons, but largely aesthetics and just interference with the sidewalk and downtown. We believe this isn't the kind of thing we want to see in the downtown, this sort of mechanical equipment in the middle of the sidewalk in a downtown area. This is just the next building over, just showing the general vicinity. Again, here's the summary of the request. Staff is recommending approval of everything with the exception of the smoker. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do I have any questions from anyone on City Council?
I guess I'd have to ask the question just for clarification. The Peepsy's is basically barbecue, and they use this particular smoker or one like it for their meals. Is there a place on that particular property that they can place that smoker that would allow them to continue operation, doing what they're doing?
I guess I would defer that to the applicant. I would say there's likely a place, but I guess my answer to that from a staff perspective is even if there's not, we would hope that folks find facilities that accommodate the business use that they need rather than having to ask the city to place something like that into the public right-of-way on the sidewalk.
Well, I know Tony's here, so I'd like to hear what she has to say.
May I also ask that obviously the owner of the property has a lease agreement with the restaurant. And if it was denied having that electric smoker there, you would have a negative impact because the lease would not work for that tenant. So I would ask if there's the potential to say that the electric smoker would be allowed until the termination or the end of the existing contract. And I also know that there are some of those smokers that pull up on weekends over in some other areas of downtown. And so the question mark is, as we talk through this, is this a singled out anonymous phone call complaint, or is it in fact something that we are enforcing in all of the downtown area?
Yes, because less than 2 blocks away, there's another one on that same street.
Yeah, and I can say that as with most of our code enforcement, it is largely complaint-based. And we did receive a complaint on this one. We have approached others in the downtown, so I wouldn't say this is a single event, but there may, as you mentioned, be others that we haven't enforced against simply because we have not received those similar complaints. I do know at least one that I can think of is actually back on the owner's property rather than out in the sidewalk, even though it is there visible, from the street. But yes, we do largely enforce based on complaints.
The wheel on the smoker and that tree there, it doesn't look like very much space. And if we are concerned with the safety issue, is that even enough space for a wheelchair or a double wide carriage? You know, when they have different events downtown, people come with their children in strollers and things. Is that even enough room to get through without accidentally bumping up against the smoker and getting a burn or something?
Well, two answers to that. One is they would be required to place it in such a way that there is sufficient room. However, I will say that the ADA requirement for that is only a 3-foot clear path. So, and that, to me, that looks more than 3 feet. And so I think how it's situated now would be compliant. The other option is they could move it down one way or the other so that it's not immediately adjacent to that tree, that, you know, giving a little more space. But
now, between the two buildings there, isn't that like a driveway or something between this building and the 2-story red brick? Isn't that a driveway?
No, it's a door opening into the bar, into the outdoor patio area, into that restaurant. It's not a driveway. There's a driveway on the northern side of that 2-story building, but that is not a driveway. Where you see those white doors there on the far right, that is not a driveway.
Okay. Well, what about the back? Is there no room in the back where that smoker could be put behind the building?
Again, I would defer to the applicant to answer that question.
Oh, okay.
Tony, can you come forward?
Tony Hunter again. I am the applicant as well as the owner of the property. The electric smoker, they never intended to be that way, but we do not have a backyard. We do not have an easement. We didn't have anything. We originally approached it perhaps as taking a parking spot, pulling it in and leaving it as a parking spot, kind of like the food trucks that park around town, and maybe just designate a spot for that to set. It is an electric smoker. We've had Ross Coleman from the fire marshal out. It's not like you would think, a cast iron thing that's cooking meat. It's an encased, insulated smoker. All it does is a low heat that they use overnight. It's not hot to the touch. He's been there, he's rubbed up against it. So it's not what we would consider a hazard to folks, other than being more curious than some people are, and maybe they shouldn't be playing with such things. But we do lock it down, lock it up, and all those kind of things. We don't have a lot of options in this situation.
You have any option?
Not really, other than losing my leasee. And the complaint came in, and for me, if there's a complaint, and obviously there's a lot of other things within that, just in a 4-block radius that could be complained about. But we got the complaint, we addressed it, we've spent the money, we've paid the money in order to apply to be able to have this. Now, as you know, as an agreement or as maybe an exception, when that lease expires, then we can move it away and then just say, I promise that we'll never do that again. But we're already in the middle, right in the middle of the lease. It's got a few months left on it. And I really don't want to lose the revenue. And we've done everything we can with the city and with the specifications and everything that needs to happen, everything that we can possibly do to try to remedy this situation. So, any questions you have, ask me something maybe I haven't thought about.
What's behind the building?
It's a 0 lot line, so it backs up against another property that's owned by someone else. There is no rear access, period.
You know, we have very few alleys downtown, which is...
Okay, well, I was just wondering I know it's 0, I know you said,
There's
I
a
didn't know until you said, but
Yes.
the property behind that, is it open?
It's actually a 0 lot line. We butt up next to a guest house that's there that has, you know, the big 2-story with the green wraparound, and then they've got a little yard, and then they've got two, behind them, they've got two properties that are like extended stays for whatever they do. However, I really don't know how she uses the property, but I know that we have 0 access, 0.
Where was this smoker before you brought it outside or decided to put it outside?
It was actually down the street on East Tewing, on another property that was purchased. So we moved it when that property got purchased.
It looks like we could take the smoker off the trailer and have a good 32 inches of
We've
clearance.
actually got, what did we measure? 50, was it 50, 45, 54 inches? It was 45 to 50 inches, I think, from the wheel to that, just where the planter starts.
The picture doesn't really reflect correctly.
Right, but we did, with the city, measured everything to see, and could we probably move it a little closer? Could we reconfigure it just a little bit? But we're talking maybe 6, 7 inches at the most.
So you're willing, I think you stated before, but I'm going to repeat it, that you really are asking and requesting that you be allowed to have that smoker there until the end of the lease that currently exists, and upon that lease terminating, then you would not look for another tenant who would need the smoker.
Right. That gives us the option to work with the tenant to resolve the situation by the time the lease is up for renewal.
Can we clarify when that lease ends by chance?
I believe it's April 1st.
I think it's April 30th,
Is it April 30th? I have to. There was a 60-day flex in that lease, so I need to go back to, to the original lease and see exactly when it is, but it's probably April 30th, something like that.
So if it wasn't approved, you would lose the leaseor because they do barbecue. That's what they do. They do
We would,
barbecue.
and it's not, and it's
you would shut.
There's a difference in. There's a difference in barbecue and smoking. This is done on a low heat. It's electric. It doesn't even use the wood that's in there is nothing, but as the unit heats up, the wood flavors the meat. It's not wood that's on fire. It's just a natural smoking process. So it's a different than what you see when they pull up those containers and they're stoking that fire. That is not happening. This is an
electric smoker.
It's actually run by electricity, not by fire.
Go ahead, please.
When the lease is up, there's no chance of them opting to continue the lease?
There is, but that gives me the time to resolve the situation, whether we have all the meat smoked at another location, which would entail me rewording the lease and reworking the lease to give them exception or, an option that reduces their lease because they're smoking at their other property that's down the street. So it just gives me a chance to rectify the situation that came up because of one complaint.
Tony, is it monitored whenever it's smoking meat?
Yes.
Somebody is there and monitoring it so somebody couldn't. My concern with asking that question is if we allow you to have the smoker and an accident occurs, I'm just wondering if the city wouldn't be liable.
No, and actually a part of this process is that we supplied all the necessary indemnification insurance information to the city, that we are liable for that. And we also, as businesses, we carry a tremendous amount of liability insurance because we all sell beer and wine and so on and so on. So we do cover our bases on that. We would never think that the city would have anything. When we go out of our way to make sure that it's safe. And having Ross over to do that ahead of time for me was important because I knew about as much about electric smokers as, probably half the people in here. So it was an educational process for me as well.
So when the lease is up next April, when you said what you would look at options or something, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but there's a chance that the people who are leasing it now would want to do another lease with you and keep the smoker there indefinitely, right?
I think my option would be they don't renew just because of the way it is and they move on. Or they do want to renew, but they're going to ask me. They're going to remove the smoker. That's all I'm asking is that gives me an opportunity to work with the tenant. And if they move the smoker, then they're going to ask me for rent for less money. And, that's how it works. It's if you lose things, then you don't want to pay for things that you got originally in a lease. So it allows me the opportunity to fix the situation so that it works for everyone.
I would not mind letting you keep the smoker till the end of the lease. It's just the fact of not having it all the time, because I think it's kind of an eyesore.
Well,
Want to-
spend some time on my side of town.
Well, I've been talking about downtown, that area.
Yeah,
that,
I
that they're-
I can walk with you for 2 blocks, and we could have all kinds of conversations.
Cross the street.
Yeah, so.
Well, I just think it's a nice one. But if you would be willing to let them stay there just till the lease is up, and then with the condition that there would not be another.
And that's basically what I'm asking. And that gives me an opportunity, in good faith, to work with my tenant and allow them to continue business, because, like earlier, it was one complaint. And that complaint was against chairs and tables, things that have been there. When we bought the property, they've been there for 10 years. And so, in compliance, we're going to do what we have to with the city to do the right thing, but we also don't want to be singled out as the only person that's having to go through all these motions. There's a lot of energy that goes into just this meeting here today, and I can be using that energy in a lot of other ways. So that's just what we're asking.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Do I have a motion on the floor?
Let me ask this question to John. Can we make the motion to grant this portion of it, the barbecue pit, only through the length of this lease, which is April of 2018, and leave the rest of it as a permanent type use agreement?
Sure, I believe so.
Okay. Well, I'll make the motion then that we allow this temporary use or this sidewalk use for this agreement, but only the barbecue pit only through the length of the lease, which is April 2018. The rest of it is out as regularly presented.
I second it. Any further public comment? Yes, sir.
I'm Clinton Dooley. The only comment I have on this, and I'm sure that Brendan might back me up on this, this location has been a very viable part of downtown San Angelo. And I know when Rod moved out, it suffered a lot of issues with trying to fill the position, trying to get people to come back to that area. I don't want to see that same kind of situation develop again, where it curtails that part of downtown when we had such a good revitalization effort going into that. That's the only thing that I'm worried about with this, and I want to make sure that they keep a good, viable source of entertainment and economy to downtown. That's my only issue on this matter.
Thank you very much. Well put. All in favor of the motion that Harry made, that we allow the electric smoker to be placed there through the end of the existing contract, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0.
Kind of hungry now. How about y'all?
Where's the barbecue or the smoked beef or pork? Okay, we are going to the item H, which is the first reading and public hearing of an ordinance amending Chapter 1, Section 4, Subsection C, Appeal to City Council of the city's Land Development and Subdivision Ordinance to allow the Planning Director or Director of Public Works to appeal variances granted or denied by the Planning Commission to City Council. John, again, you're on.
Thank you.
John Show.
This is a proposed amendment to the subdivision ordinance. Currently, when an applicant, a developer, submits a subdivision plat, they have the opportunity to request a variance from particular standards, whether it's lot width or making a road narrower than it is required under the city ordinances. Those variances are heard by the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission denies a variance, the developer can appeal that to the City Council and get another hearing. But currently under the ordinance, staff does not have the ability, if the Planning Commission denies the variance, staff can't come to the council and say, hey, this is something we think you should consider overruling the Planning Commission. So this would give staff the ability to appeal those decisions up to you all. Again, it would only allow the appeal of the plats, variances, not the plats themselves. We did look at 23 other cities' ordinances, and there's a variety, but almost all of them the plat variances either go directly to council every time, or they can be appealed to the city council. Only 2 cities currently of those, Amarillo and San Angelo, do not allow those appeals to the city council. Something I'll just add here that these cities, 35% of the cities, have all plat variances go to the city council. That's something that when we first brought this up, we had recommended to the Planning Commission. And so what we bring to you now is kind of a compromise where you guys don't have to see every single plat variance, but it does still give staff the ability to appeal those to you if we feel strongly that it's something you should be making the final decision on. This is a very simple change to the ordinance. Basically, where it authorizes an appeal, it adds the words that the planning director or the director of public works also has the authority to appeal. We did take this to our development task force meeting, which is a meeting we have every other month with the development community. There were no objections raised. They don't take formal votes, so it's not a formal recommendation, but with those present at that meeting, no one raised any issues or concerns. This did go to the Planning Commission. They made no recommendation. They believed that this was a decision for City Council because it's deciding what you should and shouldn't hear. So rather than make a recommendation one way or the other, they said, let's leave it up to the City Council to make that decision. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So basically, you're saying to us that instead of, where previously they were not allowed to approve any variances and plat variances, and so now they can go to you first, and if you don't resolve it and like it, they can then send it to City Council?
No, actually, today, a developer can ask for a variance from the Planning Commission, and then the Planning Commission makes that decision. The developer, if they don't like that decision by the Planning Commission, can appeal it to the council, but staff does not currently have that ability under the ordinance. So this would allow staff to appeal a decision of the Planning Commission onto the City Council. But in any case, it will be heard initially by the Planning Commission.
So I think, Brenda, what it may help the planning department and the council is really look a long ways down the road on things that may have the proverbial unintended consequences that we need to be thinking 10, 15, 20 years. Yeah. I'll move approval.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
This does require public hearing.
Let me back up a minute. No one voted. Now we're going to have public comment. I didn't see any hands up, so no one voted.
Oh, here you go.
Steve?
Since I seem to be one of the only people remaining in this meeting, I will come forth. But I think this is a good thing. I think this might be one of the things that expedites the process of a code, making and working with our businesses in town on changes like that. So I think this is a good thing. And they still have the appeal second to go ahead and come to the City Council if there's a problem. The only thing in order to keep the decisions kind of going the same direction that we have set, we might have some kind of a report made to the mayor or the council and that you might approve, be aware of, be approved, something of that nature. But that doesn't seem like a big thing. If there's a problem, people will complain. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? I will now take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Passes 7-0.
Oh, look, it's John.
Would Mr. John James please come forward?
John James Show.
Okay, so now it is the first reading and public hearing of an ordinance amending the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 4, Section 4.04.035, concrete and foundation construction, which would introduce a procedure for ensuring the accurate placement.
Back to I, Mayor.
We're on the wrong one.
You blew past I.
Okay, sorry, my apologies. Well, you know what? Because I've already read it, we're gonna move forward, okay? Because I'm not gonna waste my words. So, that would be, which would introduce a procedure for ensuring the accurate placement of residential building foundations. John?
I'm still hungry.
I am too.
Thank you. Again, John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. The zoning ordinance, as you probably know, requires buildings to be set back a certain distance from the property lines, typically 5 feet on the sides, 25 feet in the front, et cetera. Over the past few years, we've had more variance requests because home builders have built their homes too close to a property line. Whether it was the concrete guy didn't measure appropriately or they measured from the wrong place. In the past, we've maybe had 1 or 2 of these every couple of years, but in the last 3 years, we've had 11. And so in talking with the Zoning Board of Adjustment, they recommended that we look into the issue and say, are there ways that we can resolve this? And so this has gone back to them 2 or 3 times. And so what comes to you today is the joint recommendation of the Zoning Board of Adjustment staff, and as well as being signed off on by the home builders and the Home Builders Association. And so basically what we've done is created a solution. What we first looked at was requiring a surveyor to go out and say, yes, before they pour the foundation, they're putting it in the right place. And as we discussed through that, we thought, well, that's a little onerous to require every builder to do that on every project. And so what we came up with was this idea that for what we called rectilinear lots, basically square lots that have mostly straight lines, then the builder can just go out, find the property pins that show where the property lines are and run a string between those pins. And then our inspectors who go out to inspect the foundations anyway, they can just take a tape measure from that string to the foundation and say, yes, it's sufficient. That creates a problem on curved lots, however, because if you've got a curved lot, you've got a property pin here and a property pin here. If you connect those with a string, well, you've got a problem here where you could have the building being built too close to that line. And so what we suggested is requiring either a surveyor to do the actual survey, or they would have to sign a form basically saying that it is in compliance. And so that's kind of the compromise that everyone has agreed to. I took out what is in your packet is a big complicated chart. These are just a few examples, but just for an example, on any cul-de-sac, it would require the surveyor to sign off on it because of the significant curve. But then as the curves get bigger, if you have a long, slow, flat curve, that's if the curve is sufficiently long, then we really don't need the surveyor. We can still just run the string. And so our engineering department actually came up with the chart based on a calculation of at what point does a curve get so much that connecting the 2 strings would potentially create a problem. So that's how we came up with that chart. So again, this does come as a recommendation from the Zoning Board of Adjustment as well as staff in consultation with a number of groups. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, I think you said this earlier, but you worked closely with the Home Builders Association to make sure that they were on the same wavelength as these recommendations are. And I happened to be at one of the issues where a guy the pins were wrong, the foundation was laid, the house was built, and then they figured it out. So it does become a problem, and it's a problem when you get too far down the road, becomes a very expensive problem. So I like very much that you have worked with the home builders, that the home builders and the planning department have come together and created a solution to the problem. And I am very supportive of the presentation and thought process and the recommendations.
John, I see that the approval was 6-1. Did somebody see a downside with doing what the zoning board is recommending?
No, I think that one vote, he still believed that this was too onerous to make every home builder do, basically to solve a problem that is with a very limited number of home builders, that it's basically punishing everyone that's doing it right. But again,
We see a growing problem with it, right? If
Right.
we've had that many in that period of time, because what happens with that when, somebody puts a foundation out of spec and somebody's lived there for 3 or 4 or 5 years? What do you do?
And that was the concern that the zoning board had, in large part, is that these were typically being found after the house was constructed. And so I'll be honest, what many cities require is that you deconstruct the front part of the building and move it back or completely reconstruct the house. That's not what we thought was the best solution. The zoning board thought that wasn't the best solution. But at the same time, they didn't like approving these over and over because builders weren't measuring properly. And so, again, we think this is a solution that has the most minimal impact possible, but still lets us review the situation earlier in the process.
I move to approve as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I did not take a vote.
Public comment.
Public comment.
Steve.
She's hungry.
Steve, yes, I was wondering, is there going to be additional cost? What are the charges on this situation?
The short answer is yes, there may be a small cost. Surveyors, builders hire surveyors to come out and do a survey on the property anyway. What this might mean is one additional trip out for the surveyor. Having to do this on every one, the engineers and surveyors we talked to suggested that this might mean $200 or $300 additional expense. Again, that would be only on the ones that are on curved lots. That's one of the reasons we exempted the other lots is the additional cost, if any, would be 10 minutes for a guy running a string between 2 sticks, basically. So yeah, on the ones that are on curved lots, it would see a little bit more expense for the surveyor to come out that additional trip.
And that's where most of the problems are anyway, is on cul-de-sac and curved lots.
The majority of them have been on those type of lots, that's right.
What's the odds of a survey being wrong? If they're measuring the property line and they come back?
I would say not very likely, although we can't rule out that the surveyor makes the same mistake, but they're trained and they have a license that is on the line if they don't do it correctly versus in some cases this was just the concrete truck guy comes out and measures from the wrong place. And so we think the surveyors would likely not make that same mistake.
I'm good. Let's go.
Any further public comment? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Do we want to take a lunch break? It is 11:55, or we can approve one more.
Approve one more and then go.
We're going to go back and do I, okay? First reading and public hearing of an ordinance amending Chapter 12, Article 12.03, Division 2 of the City Code of Ordinances, and Chapter 12, Article 3 of Exhibit A, City's zoning ordinance to allow for an approved process for manufactured homes to be placed on residentially zoned properties with additional development standards. John.
Thank you. Again, John James. This, you may recall, back a few months ago, we had a property owner who came to you asking to allow a mobile home on his property. At that time, you asked us to go back and look at this ordinance and make some changes. I won't read through all of this. You probably recall from before that prior to 2000, you could come to the council and ask for placement of a mobile home. The council at that time changed the ordinance, basically making it stricter and limiting where mobile homes would be allowed or manufactured homes would be allowed in the community. This would soften that at least slightly to allow folks to seek that permission. This is just a summary of what happened back at your June meeting, what you all recommended us to look at. And so basically what we've proposed is in our residential districts, Ranch and Estate, RS1 and RS2, which are basically our single-family residential districts, it creates as a special use manufactured homes. And so in those districts, someone could come to you asking to place a mobile home on those properties. I won't spend a lot of time on this. With the Planning Commission, we discussed the option of a special use versus a conditional use. Really, the main difference is a conditional use would be a final approval by the commission, but then the applicant could appeal it to you. So you wouldn't hear every one, but you would hear those that were appealed. A special use, as we've proposed it, every one of these would come to you for consideration. And so that was our understanding of what you all recommended. I just wanted to point out that distinction. The Planning Commission did make a recommended change to the proposed ordinance that we recommended, or that we presented to them, at least based on our understanding of what the council recommended. What their recommendation was, they were concerned that allowing manufactured homes anywhere in single-family zoning would open up the door too much. It would allow anyone anywhere to ask for this, and they didn't want to see that. They thought that was going too far. And so what they understood the concern really to be is replacing an existing mobile or manufactured home. And so they limited this ordinance amendment only to the replacement of a manufactured home or mobile home. So if I've got a vacant lot in the middle of a neighborhood, I would not have the ability to come and ask you to put a manufactured home on it, only if there had previously been a mobile home or manufactured home on that property. We also added some standards for ensuring a permanent foundation, as well as the median taxable value. You may recall when we adopted an ordinance for modular homes, we said that the value of that home had to be at least the median of the surrounding home, or the surrounding area. We inserted that same language into this for manufactured homes. That addresses that issue. I think a lot of the concern with the one you all heard was that that was actually an improvement to that neighborhood. But what we wouldn't want to see is that one of these go into a neighborhood where it actually is devaluing the neighborhood. Fairly straightforward modification, but again, I wanted to make sure that you understood the change that the Planning Commission recommended that would only allow these for replacements. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Move to as presented, approve as presented.
Do I have public comment?
John, is there any kind of restraint or constraint if there has been an existing mobile home on a lot, but for whatever reason it has remained vacant for some period of time, much like what in the discussion we just immediately had, the 12-month time frame earlier? Is there that sort of condition or restraint here as well?
Well, there is, but as long as the home is on the property, they're good. Whether it's occupied or not is not the issue. If there has been a mobile or manufactured home on the property within the previous 12 months, then they would qualify.
Okay, all right.
There has been a motion and a second. We've asked for public comment. There has been none. We'll take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. We are going to go into executive session, and Section 551.072, deliberations about real property regarding Lot 9A, Block 2, Section 9A, Red Arroyo Hills Edition will be the topic of conversation, and we anticipate this being about a 30-minute executive session. So we will adjourn until approximately 30 minutes. At
12:40?
12:40. In executive session, we moved to support a request by Costa DC to make an offer to buy the property from the city for $25,000 under the recommendation that the Costa DC would pick up the cost for the environmental and cleanup studies, as well as pay for the cleanup. And if the property is sold, that the Costa DC would get their $25,000 back, and then whatever the property sold for over and above $25,000, the city and Costa DC would share in that dollar amount, 50-50. Do I need to comment any further?
No, that's a motion, but we just need the second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 7-0. We'll move back to the regular agenda, and we're going to Move to item L, consider approving a contract for RFQ WU 0317 Professional Service Water Supply Engineering Feasibility Study with Allen Plummer and Associates Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $574,099 and authorizing the city manager to negotiate and execute all related documents. And Bill Riley, I believe you're presenting.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mayor, Council. I appreciate the opportunity to bring this item before you this afternoon. Most of what I'm going to have here is stuff that you've already seen through the workshops that we did, but I wanted to take just a minute to kind of go back through this and kind of lay out the reason that we feel that we need to move forward with this study. Just as a reminder, one of the things that I think it's important for us to remember is that our surface water supplies are vulnerable to drought conditions. And in fact, our main water supply, Lake Ivy, has been less than 12 months supply twice in the last few years. And so that kind of lays the foundation for what we need to do to augment our current supplies. Again, as a reminder, our contract with CRMWD for water out of Lake Ivy is for 15,000 acre-feet a year, but the safe yield of Ivy has been reduced to a little under 5,000 acre-feet a year. And while CRMWD has not adopted that and changed their policy, they still allow us to take the 15,000. And for water planning purposes, this is what we have available, because it in fact could change to where this is what we are allowed to take each year. In relation to that, of course, is our Hickory Groundwater Project, which currently has the capability of producing about 9,000 acre-feet a year, or 8 million gallons a day, and with a ultimate build-out of 12,000 acre-feet, and that's our maximum allotment from the permits that we have for producing the Hickory groundwater. The plant's at 8 million gallons, and as we've discussed, the next step in that would be to upgrade the Hickory to where it will produce the full 12,000 acre-feet, or 10.7 million gallons a day. So our current water supplies, again, for planning purposes, are around 13,000, just under 14,000 acre-feet. That's roughly what our average use is, or our annual use is currently. So based on these numbers, we can meet that projected need. And again, just kind of a recap, just looking at what our population projections would be moving out 50 years, we can see that we're going to need additional water supplies in the future, probably in the 10 to 15,000 acre-feet range. But that's a little bit different issue than what we're talking about today. The reality is that we have to plan the fact that Ivy, since it got to under 12 months of supply twice, that the reality is it could potentially go away. And I think, as we've discussed, I don't think it's realistic to think that it would go away forever, that it would just dry up and not have water. But there could potentially and very likely be a time period that we would need to bridge. And I don't know what that number is. How is it months, a year, 3 years, or what that time frame would be. But I think it's prudent for us to look for ways to augment our supplies so that we can bridge that gap if we need to. And then equally important is to be able to have water supply to support economic development and growth within the city. So the objective is to develop a comprehensive water supply plan. The process would be to begin to look at all of our options, vet those, the things that we have looked at that have been identified and those that are yet to be identified, compare those on an apples-to-apples basis, and begin to understand the feasibility of those on both cost and non-cost basis. In other words, not only the evaluation not only has to determine or be determined by what it costs us to implement it, but what's the feasibility of being able to implement that over a long time and the viability of that supply. So the bottom line is that the objective would be to develop a roadmap, if you will, that lays out how we can augment our water supplies today, and develop a timeline and a plan for implementation of those supplies, and also the improvements that we've all talked about that are needed in our treatment infrastructure in both our wastewater and our water treatment plants. And that plan would be coupled with the long-term plan that the West Texas Water Partnership is working on to give the city a 50-plus year, I call a master water supply plan. They can be implemented over time so we understand when we need to implement sections of that and what it will cost us and how we move forward to protect and grow our water supplies. Unfortunately, that's not cheap. The basic services in the study is about $372,000. We've broken this up this way in basic and special services. There are some groundwater supply options that could hold some potential options for the city. However, I think in the initial review of those would determine whether it's even feasible to even continue in evaluation. So the basic services would take a cursory look at those options. If it proved that there was some real potential there, then the special services would kick in, bring in the groundwater experts, and develop that option as a potential supply, with a total not to exceed amount of the contract of $574,099. So just as kind of a timeline of how the advisory board has looked at this, last year the advisory board took some of the options that we have and did a SWOT analysis, and we spent a couple of meetings doing that. We just looked at those as a group and determined which ones that we thought had some potential and which ones that we knew had issues that were not going to be feasible projects. At the end of that, the next step was, okay, now we need to really take an in-depth look at this and bring a consultant in to pull all this together and help us to develop the roadmap. In August of last year, the advisory board voted unanimously to recommend moving forward with that option, develop a scope of services, develop an RFP, and move forward with hiring a consultant. Went back to the advisory board in November and gave them an update, and as we did again in May, and told them that we were going to be moving forward, bringing that to council. We went back to the advisory board last Wednesday, laid out this project for them, and they made a unanimous recommendation to you to move forward with awarding this contract and developing this long-range plan.
Do we have any questions?
How are you going to pay for it, Bill?
It is budgeted in our current budget.
In the current budget?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And where does that, but when you pay for this, what don't you pay for because you're paying for this?
Nothing. This was in our capital funds that were available for this study.
But it impacts capital fund, it impacts the ability to do something with capital. I'm not in support of this. I will tell you that I'm pretty much not in support of consultant fees to start with. And as you went through many of the items here in terms of what we need to do, seems like to me we've done a lot of it through our own staff. And I'm not sure I understand spending $575,000 to hire a consultant to look for water, if you will, when, number one, if the West Texas Water Partnership hasn't found it, how can they? Number two, this is the third consultant scope of services. Describe to me what we did the first and second times we hired them to do some consultant work for us and how that differs from this one.
Yeah, I assume you're talking about this firm. I assume you're talking about the first study they did was an initial review for how to use, if there was a way to use the reuse for the wastewater effluent. Following that, the city hired them to conduct a pilot study for the direct potable reuse project. Totally separate than these.
All right, so then the other part I noticed in one of the line items as I went through the study that they were going to do was to project out our population and project out our water usage. And you just showed me a chart that does that. So why would we pay them over $7,000 to do the same thing I just looked at?
Well, these are just specific recommendations that, the projections that we came up with that were part of the Region F plan. If we're really going to understand our needs, we're going to have to make sure that we have all of that done appropriately and projected not only in our population, but what our demands are going to be. So
Isn't that what you just showed me?
Well, what I showed you was
there.
Yes, and I think we need to confirm that.
If we can't confirm it, who can confirm it for us?
Well,
I mean, this is our city, our water, our consumption, our projections, how could our numbers be different than paying somebody to come up with different numbers? I mean, I'm confused. If we can put this together, why we need to pay somebody else to put it together for us?
Well, Mayor, there's a lot of work that goes into projecting the population and the usage patterns. And
Right.
we want to make sure that we have those right.
Bill, I guess for me, what expertise do they have that we currently don't have on staff to?
This is a huge project, okay? And it's going to take the expertise of a lot of different disciplines. And that's the value of bringing in a consultant. You're not hiring a person. You're hiring a national firm that can bring in the expertise for the different disciplines, the different facets of this project to devote to this project. We do not have the expertise on staff to not to just focus on this, but to develop this. It's what these folks do, and we need to, in my opinion, over the next not too many years, the city is going to spend somewhere between $100 and $200 million in developing water supply just to meet our current needs and infrastructure replacement. We should have a good plan for that. If we miss that, we could spend more than $500,000 real quick. We could waste millions of dollars. So I think it's important to have a good roadmap, a good plan for that.
So we need a consultant to tell us what our infrastructure problems are?
We do. We do need a consultant to look at what our specific needs are in our wastewater treatment plant. We're talking about getting a discharge permit so that we would be able to put that in the river and be able to utilize that effluent. We need to understand all that. What are our options? How do we need to design that plant? Depending on what our
If we don't decide to do effluent, then why do we need to? I mean, because you have to first of all agree to want to do effluent before you need that study, and we haven't agreed to do that yet.
Well, we need to develop all the data so you can make that decision.
And what data is different from the first and second study, since the first and second studies dealt with effluent usage?
They looked at, the biggest part of the studies was direct potable reuse. And
Right.
that's what they looked at. They looked at how we would utilize that, how we would treat that. This is actually taking that a different direction. How can we utilize our effluent in a non-direct way, in an indirect way, putting it into the river, taking it out downstream through some sort of riverbank filtration, putting it into the ground through an aquifer storage and recovery project. There's a multitude of potential options that we can utilize to be able to use that water that is ours, about 7 million gallons a day on average.
Right. Sorry, go ahead, Harry.
So if we decided that for some reason or other that we didn't want to do this, what would be our options since we have to depend on the good Lord to let it rain on the watersheds and put more water in the lakes and rivers, streams, whatever? I know me and the Lord probably see eye to eye on a lot of things, but I'm not sure that He's going to allow me to make the prediction that we're going to have water in that lake sufficient enough so that my granddaughter's grandchildren will have water. So I'm looking at whatever we can do for 50 years down the line. I don't worry about next week or next year. What can we do 50 years down the line to ensure that the population that is here 50 years from now, in 2067, 2070, really have the water to allow this community to continue to grow and support the population of 150,000 people. So if we don't do this, what are our options to try to get to that particular spot?
Well, Mr. Thomas, I think we would need to move forward with our plants, and we would figure out how we upgrade our plants without any knowledge or understanding of what our source waters might be for that. Hopefully we would get it right. As far as water supply, if you don't do this today, then I'm going to go out and start trying to negotiate some sort of emergency backup supply. 50 years down the road, I think we continue to work with the West Texas Water Partnership for that. But that doesn't solve today. It doesn't solve for the next 20 years. And we need to make sure, to me, have ourselves in a position where we won't run out of water, where if we do lose Ivy for a period, we have something in place to make that up. The Hickory won't do that. It won't meet our daily needs. It comes close. But if we're relying strictly on the Hickory, we're relying on a well field that's 70 miles from here with a lot of moving parts. I don't think that's a good plan. It's a great source of water for us. It was a great decision, a very smart decision that the city did, but it doesn't answer the question. And so we've just got to get back to where we need to be now and continue to plan for the 50 years.
So, but they can't, go ahead. Go ahead. But they can't find the water for us. If West Texas Partnership hasn't come up with the water, and we're paying whatever we're paying annually for us to work with them to find the water, how is this consultant piece of paper worth $570,000 going to find water for us?
Well, there's two different things, Mayor. One is the West Texas Water Partnership is looking for a large supply of water that does take us out for a long time. We're looking at how to augment our supplies and make up a gap, bridge a gap today and 20 years from now, and provide some, make sure that our supplies are viable enough that you can bring business in here. That we can have economic development today. That's the objective with this, is to have a plan that finds something that helps us, and that might end up being just an emergency supply with somebody, a contract with Abilene or somebody. That might be the answer, but it might not be. There might be other options that we have using our own water.
If I may, Mayor, I'm sorry. As far as the West Texas Water Partnership, as Bill just pointed out, it is a long-term search. It could be 20, 30 years down the road. One thing that the member cities have always understood is that we're responsible for the short-term and intermediate water needs of our community, and that's what each one of the communities is doing right now in Abilene, in Midland, and us as well. Actually, even as we know right now, Odessa's we've been working on that for quite a while, but that's one of the things that we all agreed on, is that we would be responsible for locating and addressing the short-term and intermediate terms for our communities, and this is actually what we're trying to do at this point. The long-term part of it, West Texas Water Partnership is looking at it because it's going to be a very, very costly endeavor, probably close to about $1 billion when it's all said and done. So again, on our part, we do understand the concern as far as the cost for the study. But I'm really worried at this point because even at the study is going to take about 18 months. And I'm scared to death as far as what could happen with our water supply then, as far as what we have in surface water with Ivy. So again, our big concern is to make sure that we shore up and we fill the gap.
Well, my concern is, number one, is that we need to find the money to complete the drilling of 5 wells. Number two, we need to find the money to improve the water treatment facilities. Mm-hmm. Those two things alone help shore up short-term needs. And when you start talking about capital money, money is money. $500,000 buys you a part of what I just said. And I look at it, and in reference to many of the consultant groups and surveys and things that we have racks and racks of studies done. They're sitting on shelves that we've never had the money to execute whatever was in those studies. And by the time, if we can get to those studies, the information's antiquated and not current. So I think at some point we have to say, what is our priority? A priority is getting 5 more wells drilled, Hickory Aquifer. That was to be a key component of our water source. And if you talk about 18 months, the chances of finding something else in the 18 months out from now that's going to shore up our water supply is slim and none. If there's something out there right now that we can find, that we can get piped in here or pulled in here in 18 months, why haven't we been talking about it? And it obviously would have been more obvious by now. So I'm worried that we're spending money that takes money out of a capital fund that we need to complete 5 wells and upgrades of water treatment facilities. And I do not question the need to look for water down the road. I don't. But I go through this thing and look at the various line items in terms of where this study's going, and I've got question marks in terms of whether it's the best use of the money in the big picture on that laid out proposal.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Mayor and Council, Roland Pena, Director of Economic Development. I'm bringing you the perspective as a member of the Water Advisory Board. I appreciate your comments and concerns, and I just want to provide insight as to how me, as an individual member of the Water Advisory Board, looked at the proposal. So we saw this as a water supply resource plan that looks into the future, that is looking at all these options, including what you just talked about, those additional wells and expansion at the Hickory. But it would give us a roadmap to determine when those options need to be in place and how in advance we need to be working toward bringing those options online. So we saw that as a much more, as a study that solidifies all those options into one plan and gives us a schedule with cost and a timeline of when they need to come online.
Don't we know that? Don't we know we need to drill 5 more wells? Don't we know we need to upgrade the water treatment facilities? Don't we know that now?
We do know that. I think we've stated all along that we know that the upgrade of the Hickory needs to happen. This is not going to look at that. And the word study gets a bad rap, but it's really a preliminary engineering plan, okay, that allows us to then go apply for a TPDS permit so that we can drop our effluent in the river. It helps us, again, understand, does the preliminary engineering for understanding what we need to do in our wastewater treatment plant. It also will allow us to apply for any state or federal funding, that we have to have this done to be able to do that.
Didn't we agree last year, did the city council agree to go ahead and apply with that water fund, the state water fund, for $1.5 million, and we filled it out and applied for it then?
Well, it was a SWIFT funding, and we
Okay.
put in an application for $150 million.
Yeah, so we applied for that.
That
But
was
I
specific
noticed-
to that project.
Okay, but I noticed that those terminologies, SWIFT, also included in this document. So is that not part of what we applied for already?
All they said in that document was that if we wanted them to, they would assist with any SWIFT funding application or state or federal application.
Didn't we apply already for
We have
SWIFT?
not.
So the council approved it, we just didn't do it.
The council also voted to retract that application.
Okay.
But again, those applications are project-specific. What we did back then won't apply to something other than that project. You still have to have the preliminary engineering done.
Bill, back up just a minute for me. You referenced, I think, quickly just then, this particular analysis would look at what some of the needed requirements are at the wastewater treatment facility. Does that also include any needed or potential needed things at the water treatment facility?
It will, Councilman Hebert, the thing that we want to make sure we do is understand, before we just go out and start upgrading these facilities, is we understand what our potential water sources are going to be beyond what we have today. We want to make sure that anything that we do today takes us and works for us into the future for potential different water sources. So yes, it will.
But if we don't know what the water source is, no one else can give us a study that says what we need to do to that facility. Because if you don't have it identified, you don't know about the water treatment and what we need. You got to identify the water source first, which we haven't been able to do beyond the Hickory Aquifer right now.
And that's what we're trying to do, is identify another source that will augment our current supplies and bridge the gap. And once we, as part of this is, as we understand that, then the improvements that are made to the water treatment and wastewater treatment plant take that into consideration. Now, do we know what we're going to have 30, 50 years from now? No, we don't. But we know what we can have now. and we need to begin to design those improvements, knowing what that source is.
So we know now, that is, we have the Hickory Aquifer and
That really only gets us to 2020 according to your map, the chart that you've got right here. Basically, because at 2020, we need approximately 18,000 gallons. Now, I understand you told us before that this number is probably a little larger than what we would probably need, but it's certainly between 14 and 18.
Correct.
So at that point in time, even if we had the 5 additional wells done, or what our total capacity was 12,000 gallons. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's 12,000 acre feet.
12.
yeah.
12 million, yes, okay. And you're receiving whatever we can get out of the Ivy today, which you indicated was 4681 or whatever that number is. That only gets us to 16.
Correct.
But also remember, we lose our banked water rights in the year 2026. Okay, so you lose your banked water rights 2026, so you have to be using it up. So if you take a look at right now, we're in year 2017, and we're only using how much of the banked water per year that we have available to us?
We're not using any of the banked water.
Right, so if you take from 2012 to, let's just say 2018, how much of that banked water, how much banked water do we have to supplement that number with before you get to 2020?
But you can only put 12 million gallons through the pipe, is that correct?
That's correct, roughly. The banked water is an insurance policy. It's not additional water set aside somewhere that we lose. Okay, so I don't think the mindset should be that if we need to go use that up. If we need it, it's there. Because right now we can't pump. Right now we can't. There's nothing to lose. It's an insurance policy. Right now we can't pump but the 12,000 acre feet. Our allocation is only 2,500, and it's going to be that way for a while. It goes up to 5,000, and then it goes up to 10,000. Okay. Well, before it gets there, if we have to rely on that, then we're going to eat into that banked water, and if it's not there, we don't pump.
Do we have further questions?
So let me summarize for my mind, Bill. What you're recommending is a plan to get us, I'm going to say at a minimum 20 years down the road, if not further, even though that plan will have to be adjusted over time. This moves us 20, 25, 30 years down the road with adjustments as they would become necessary. Is that a correct summation or no?
That's a good summation, yes, sir.
Okay.
That's if we find additional water? Is that what you're saying? Because this study does, or does it basically say we're looking at, because there isn't just another pot of water out there in a near really close, like reach out and touch it kind of thing, because that's what the closest thing we've had is the Hickory Aquifer, right?
I don't think we're going to be able to find a hole of water somewhere that we can go tap into.
Correct.
We're going to have to do some things to make that water available.
Correct.
Right.
Bill, I'm looking at this study and the scope of practice that they're looking at, and I'm looking at each task and each subtask, and I'm going to go back on what the mayor said. I'm looking at the descriptions of each and what we can be doing in-house, such as projecting the plan, planning our own workshops, finding the criteria for screening the alternatives from the workshop, a lot of things that we as a council are going to be deciding on how we want to go before we get down to task 6, which was water supply engineering feasibility study. All of that can be done, like if we're going to be deciding if we want to do those 5 wells, that's decided from us on a council, and we can move forward if we need a study then at a way cheaper rate than $547,000.
Those wells, the Hickory is not part of that. What we did, we built in a lot of workshops with the consultant, with the advisory board and the council, and the community. So
No,
that
I'm not including the Hickory on that. I'm just saying from this report, I see a lot of things that we can probably handle on our own, especially impact of existing and upcoming federal/state regulations and permitting requirements. That's just a little bit of research on TCEQ to find
it's
what.
a little bit more than that, Councilman Carter. These folks are experts and work with the regulatory agencies all the time, and they can evaluate those regulations. They have insight to those regulations, and I want to capitalize on that. I think that's a very important part of this.
I understand that it's important, but I mean, we can find the regulations from federal and state on our own to try to maximize how much money we have for our own capital.
Let's put that in perspective.
I know an anesthesiologist that can recite all the TCEQ based on all the flooding off of Foster Road. If we need a consultant, we can probably consult him.
That's a good plan.
But he's done his own research, and I believe there's some things that we can do on our own to try to save this city some money and go the route of what's best for the next 50 years. Because I know Harry's granddaughter needs some water, and I know my son Jackson needs some water.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Right. I'm just
I don't
trying
want
to
to be
save
so
us some money.
short-sighted on this thing that we try to save a few $1,000s and come with an incomplete plan that we cannot utilize. If the experts say that it's going to take this amount of money for this particular plan, we can nitpick this thing and say, hey, we don't need that part, we don't need this part. But if it comes back with a plan that we can't utilize, what good is that for the citizens? Then we've wasted $450,000 and not. So from my perspective, I want to support this. It's a lot of money, I understand that. But I guarantee you, if you don't get an expert to try to help you find the water and process it the way it needs to be done, then we are just throwing money into the wind. If you're going to go get legal counsel for some reason or other, you're going to pay for that particular attorney. If you're going to go get advice from a doctor, you're going to pay for that. So if we are going to get water and water sources and secure the water for the next, how many ever years would this study is going to do? I still say 50. The bottom line is you've got to go to the experts, and if you go to the experts, you're going to have to pay for it. So from my perspective, I can support this.
Bill, and council, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but the question was asked earlier about two studies we've had prior to this. Did they do something different, Bill, than this study will do? Or say that again, I'm sorry, I just.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. The first study was just it was a true study. Okay, they just looked at how the city might utilize its effluent in some manner. Okay, and they just developed a report that had some options and some ideas, and more than that, obviously, it had some engineering in it. The second study was we hired them specifically to do the pilot for the direct potable reuse. Okay. So the focus was on using treating our effluent to drinkable water quality standards, and so that it focused specifically on that.
So those two were totally different than what this has that we're looking at now. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thanks.
But it's not lost. I mean, that data is there, that study's there, so it's part of the portfolio, if you will, of understanding of our options.
Because we may get to the point of that direct potable reuse at some point. Okay. Thank you.
Bill, does this study have a shelf life?
Well, that's an interesting question. If we don't act on it, yes. But I would say, I'd have to say no, because the plan, we really need to do something with our treatment facilities, okay? So I cannot see us not implementing that. If we find some feasible water supply, I can't see us not doing that. If the ultimate idea is okay, or the option is to go negotiate a contract with somebody, if that's even a possibility, for emergency supply, or even long-term supply, then we would go do that. So I think the real answer would be is no. It's intended, this is not intended, and I heard what the mayor said, and I understand that. I've seen that too many times where we go do a study, and in a lot of cases it has nothing to do with really what you wanted to do. So it sits on a shelf. That's not the intent for this. We need to do something. So the intent is to finally pull all this together and go do something.
Well, and where I'm going with that is, even when we were all campaigning to be here, we had feedback from our constituents, and they've elected us to be up here and say, proper use of money. And so many times we heard something thrown in our face. Well, did we really need somebody to tell us, we needed to redo Bell Street or Chadburn? And I get where they're coming from, but I think what you're gathering up here is trying to tell us there's some parts of expertise here that we don't have. And you're going to need that information from those people there. Would actually have enough guts to sign their name on a sheet of paper and say, in my professional opinion, I guarantee this, where there could potentially be issues and legal issues further down the line.
Yes, sir, that's correct. I mean,
and the proper credentials to make that statement.
I just want to make sure the elements you're going for here, Bill, are something, and I agree with the mayor. If there's something here we can do our own, can we line item veto it out and do some things on our own here to save some money, or do you have to have this in its entirety?
There's absolute things that we can do. We laid out this scope, developed the scope. It was based on what we needed to put in this project. If there's any of this that we can do, then we do it. But the fact of the matter is, you're absolutely right. These folks, this is a highly technical study, and these folks are experts in this, and we just need to capitalize on that the expertise that they have. And like I said, the value of hiring a consulting firm like this is they can bring experts from all over the country if they're needed for specific line items. No, we don't have this expertise in-house, and you wouldn't want to have this kind of expertise in-house because you couldn't afford that, for one thing. The other thing is they wouldn't have this kind of stuff for them to do. And the value of hiring a consultant is when you're done, they go home, and you're not still paying that.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, when I read it says scope of services, and I'm going to read a couple of the line items here. One, it says evaluate San Angelo's current water supplies and develop a plan for future use of those current supplies. You've made several presentations to us, and as far as I'm concerned, those presentations did that very first line item of evaluating San Angelo's current water supplies, and develop a plan for future use of those current supplies.
Mayor, when you have multiple water supply sources, you have to make sure that those sources can be utilized together. Okay, it's the same thing with our Hickory groundwater and our surface water supplies. The characteristics of that water is not the same. So you have to go through a process to make sure that they actually, when you put them together, that it doesn't create chemical reactions and issues that either destroy the pipes and infrastructure, or you have taste and odor issues. So any source that we currently have, we have to understand that so that when we look at different sources, we make sure that we can put those together.
But didn't we know, and don't we know, that when we built the $120 million Hickory Aquifer pipeline, that in fact we would be using what facilities we would be using and what water we would be mixing with it at that point in time? So we know that.
We did, but it might change if we have a different source. We're not proposing to go pay them to do something that's not of value to this process.
Then
we're not going to have them just go look at our supplies and say, well, you have this, and we know we have that. This is what they're doing is in relationship to the project, to the other water sources, and how we develop a water sources for San Angelo.
And the second item says identify potential new water sources. So, and I lay that out again, if we've been looking for water around here for quite a while, so I can't imagine that by hiring this consultant group that they're going to find us new water sources. They might find, as you've said, ways to use the existing water sources in a different way, perhaps, but new water sources.
That would be a new water supply source, regardless of what it is. If it's a new supply to us, if it's a even if it's our own effluent and it now becomes part of our supply, it's a new supply that we have to make part of the portfolio, and it has to work together chemically.
I'm going to repeat, I'm very in favor of the 5 new wells at Hickory Aquifer and bringing on up to current necessary levels our water treatment plant. Those are huge priorities for me. So with that said, are there other further comments?
I'll make a motion that we approve as presented by Mr. Riley to go forward with this particular consulting firm and develop a full water plan that takes care of the citizens' needs for a number of years going forward.
I second that motion.
Do I have public comment? If you'll state your name, please.
My name is Deborah Bailey, and I'm in total agreement with you. We paid $800,000 last year for this same company to do, it was my understanding at the time, to first look for a new water source, then to look at the effluent water, and then we paid them to come up with the plan to use that effluent water. I think this is almost insanity. This is the definition of insanity. We're doing the same thing again and expecting a different result. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional public comment?
I guess I'm up. Steve Hampton. Makes me want to go out and open up a Willow Branch water finding business when I hear these kind of comments. We could do other things that carry on and make better use of our current water. I'm agreed with the mayor. Bill has a responsibility to warn, and he's done that, and I think he's done it many times. We haven't done anything like taken our lakes that are dry now and lined them with maybe bentonite or something like that, so we can prepare when the rain comes. We've talked about the effluent reuse, and I think that's probably what we're going to have to do. But the production costs are real high. Maybe in the future some new machinery will be coming out that will help us to collect it at a reasonable cost. We could eradicate the mesquite trees. You know, that's an old one, but when it comes down to it, we have to faith that Harry, excuse me, has brought up invoked that you know, the good Lord has got this program started, and I think He's going to help us see it through. But we have to do a part in keeping faith in Him, and we can't be morally bankrupt and give it lip service and then depend on the arm of man as we think we ought to. We have to reform ourselves and stay a faith-based community. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Terry Giroux. I also feel that what we would be doing by approving this would be to throw in good money after bad. $800,000 was a lot of money to put out there, and I don't know that we really got the bang for the buck that we should have gotten. It was decided that toilet to tap was a good idea. And we've even allocated, I guess, the water department has even decided to raise our rates by 5% a year for the next few years, based on that toilet to tap, which we're not even going to go forward with. So we as homeowners, business owners, are strapped now. And to go looking for a needle in a haystack when we've turned over every rock in West Texas, it seems like, to get the water resources that we have, we probably ought to be looking at technological and scientific improvements regarding the waters that we do have, some way, shape, or form, reducing dissipation of our lake water, river water, things of that nature. But I think doing another, quote, feasibility study is just not the way to go in these really tough times. Thank you.
Any further public comment? All right, we'll take a vote. The motion on the table is to accept the request to spend $570,000 for this study by Allen Plummer Associates. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Aye. Passes 5-2. We are going to pull item M. We are going to move to item N, and that is consider resolution authorizing. Sorry?
Could we pull item R up? I see Commissioner Bacon here. We can go ahead and.
Sure.
We can go ahead and get him.
Okay. Item R, we're going to skip and move to item R. Consider authorizing the city manager to negotiate and execute an interlocal agreement with Tom Green County for joint participation in a Texas Department of Agriculture 2017 Texas Community Development Block Grant Program, Texas Capital Fund Project, if grant funds are awarded to construct sewer improvements to benefit the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Council of the Concho Valley's Journey Recovery Center Development Project. Rick, you're on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Council, Mayor. Apologize for that long agenda item. We had the same agenda item this morning, so I have the original document here for y'all, and hopefully mine won't take as long. There's not much discussion on it. We are in the process of applying for a Texas infrastructure grant through the Texas Department of Agriculture. Part of that, we currently have an agreement, I understand, with the sewer line. The city's helping with that as far as the design. However, we found an opportunity through the Department of Agriculture when the ADAC Journey facility was going to be built out there that they would be eligible to apply for this grant. We're going to be eligible for approximately $400,000 to apply towards the cost of the sewer line. County is on the hook for that sewer line. We're paying for that. Y'all designed it, we'll build it. And so this is an opportunity for us to recover some of that state money that goes to Austin all the time. And anytime we have an opportunity that I think the state can help us out, I think we should try that. And all we're asking is for y'all to approve the MOU. This is a terminology that TDA requested, and that's the reason that we had to do this. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Do we have questions for Rick?
I'll move to approve.
Move approval. Thank you all.
Several people want to approve it.
All right,
That must be
that's
good.
great. Thank you.
That
I
could be the
appreciate
good
it.
news.
Communication is good.
There's a second. Do I have public comment? We will take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? None. Passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick, and thanks for
Rick.
being
Bye, Rick.
patient with us. We will go back up to item N, which is consider resolution authorizing the acquisition of permanent easements and rights-of-way across various parcels of real property required for the Bell Street Improvement Project, and authorizing the city manager to execute all related documents, finding a public use and benefit therefore, and authorizing initiation of eminent domain proceedings pursuant to law, if necessary, to acquire the property for said easements and rights-of-way. And Shane? You're on.
Well, Mayor, that was such a good presentation. I think you kind of did it for me there. So it is basically exactly what it says in the caption. So we're just, this is basically just so we can give notification to adjacent landowners. It's a very important public project. We're moving forward with it. We want to move forward with it very quickly. And this is just a first step to give notification to those adjacent property owners that if we can't come to a reasonable agreement, that eminent domain is a possibility out there. So first step, we don't plan to do any eminent domain, but it's just a first step just in case. So, and that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's not a...
All right, Shane, let's see if we have any questions from anybody.
I have a question, Shane. So are you running into a lot of problems, or is it just one or two properties that are?
It's just one or two properties thus far. Most everybody has been very accommodating. They want to see the Bell Street project done, and they want to see it done very quickly. You know how bad a shape it's in and how long people have been talking about this for a long time. So it's just one or two property owners that we're having some negotiation difficulties with, and so. Again, it's not everybody, it's just one or two.
And Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, are these couple properties that's in subject is actually a result of bad surveying to where our mapping shows that their property actually extends further out than it actually should?
We did.
Subject?
Well, there were quite a few properties like that, of course, I guess Bell Street being one of the oldest streets in town, and laid out so long ago that some of the surveying and property lines did overlap in different places. However, there's one or two of these that we're actually we are actually needing to actually get onto property that they've already built. It's not just taking our street back, but because we're actually in one or two places, it's signalized intersections. We're gonna add turning lanes in there. We're gonna add sidewalks. We're putting the water lines out from underneath the street, outside the curb line, so in case we ever do have any problems with the water line, we don't have to dig up the street to fix the water line, things like that. So we are actually purchasing easements and rights of way that are actually outside of the traditional street that we see now. But we are, a lot of this is cleaning up some of those old surveys that were incorrect.
Daniel, you had a comment?
I just wanted to make sure that people normally hear eminent domain. I just want to make sure everybody understands we're not talking about taking whole properties. We're talking about just the portions that we need as far as right-of-ways to make sure that we can complete the project, correct?
Yeah, small, like, you know, it may be 200 foot long and 5 foot wide or something. It's very, very narrow sections that we're actually talking that we're negotiating with. And this would only, again, this would only be if negotiations completely broke down and we weren't able to work out a deal with the property owners, and we want to make sure that we keep the project moving and that one property owner or two property owners don't completely stop the project. We want to be able to keep the project moving and keep it on schedule, because we don't want to, you know, I'd hate for, you know, because we can't negotiate with one property owner that we postpone Bell Street for another year. We don't want to do that. So again, this is just a first step in that process.
This is kind of an easement either for the sidewalk or the water line or the
turn
intersection.
Lane. Yeah, intersection, turn lane, yes, sir.
Any further questions for Shane? Then do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve as presented.
A second?
Second.
Any public comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 7-0. Next item is first public hearing and introduction of an ordinance amending the 2016 and 17 budget for incomplete projects, equipment replacement, and grants. And Tina Dursky is presenting.
Hello again. I have here for your consideration our final budget amendment of the year. The first amendment is for traffic operations, and that is related to a storm damage claim for a traffic signal at the corner of Main and Pulliam. We'll be increasing revenue and expense. The revenue is from risk management, and of course the expenditure to fix the traffic signal. The next amendment is for environmental health. They have increased permit revenue that they would like to capture so that they can do some things within their operating budget. Next would be airport taxiway reconfiguration grant and the aircraft rescue and fire truck grants. Lou explained those to you earlier this morning in detail. Next up is the Ford Ranch lease income. As you're aware, there is a lease on the Ford Ranch, and there will be revenue associated with that, and we will be budgeting for both revenue and some expenses that they plan to make improvements out there on the ranch related to the Hickory project. And then fleet services materials, revenue of $200,000. That would be revenue generated from the funds that are needing the additional materials and then the expenditures related to those materials. Property casualty insurance claims, that is money budgeted in the risk management fund for, I guess it would be subrogation, I don't know the right word, but that they would be receiving that revenue from TML to fund some of the storm damage that we had in June related to city facilities. Next up would be closing of, well, actually 2 bond funds that we're closing out. The projects are completed, and so we close those out to fund balance and use them for debt service in the related funds. And the creation of the hotel occupancy tax fund, we talked about this a little bit in our budget workshop, that we're creating that new fund so that we can be more transparent with our hotel occupancy tax revenues. And then finally, we have the budget amendment for the Development Corporation, the ACT Work Ready Community Reimbursement of $4,200. That would complete the presentation on the budget amendments. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer
Just
them.
have a comment.
Yes, sir.
Tina, and I certainly appreciate this. As I started looking at budgets some 14, 15 months ago with the city, or however long it's been, one of the things I noticed was we had some older funds. And in my quarterly meeting with you and Morgan, I asked about those, and a couple of those you've retired now.
Yes.
Some of them we took the money and put against our bond issues. Some of them we took and put in against projects that the city needed. So I appreciate you answering those questions and taking a look at what we could do. Also, the difference in where those hot funds go. That creation of that particular separate fund, to me, makes all the sense in the world, so that you can separate the hot funds from the civic event stuff. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for those comments.
Any other questions of Tina?
And
I don't think we have to take any action.
There is action on the budget amendment.
There is action,
Yes,
so I
ma'am.
need a motion.
Move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Any public comment? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? 0. Passes 7-0. Next item, P, discussion and consideration of matters regarding the fiscal year 2017 and 18 budget preparation, including but not limited to 1, council direction regarding general fund expenditures, and 2, other items needing council direction. You're on.
This item is just to provide an opportunity for discussion, if there is any, and also to remind you of our budget workshop on August 22nd, where we'll go into very much more detail on general fund revenues and expenditures. The potential priorities we've discussed so far include salaries, insurance, additional ambulance crew, and additional police officers. This would be an opportunity for you to let us know if there's something different you're wanting to see, something more that you're wanting to see, or any research that we can do in preparation for that budget workshop, or really any other discussion related to general fund revenue expenditures that you may want to have at this time.
I know I, for one, want to make sure that we don't make, until we go through the work session on August 22nd at 8:30 in the morning here at McNeese Center, I want to make sure that we have a thorough discussion on those issues, as well as all the other issues that are encompassing in terms of the general fund. And so today, I don't believe we should be making any decisions or giving any direction to any of these items, because we haven't reviewed the big picture. And I don't think we can agree or disagree or direct without the big picture.
Okay. And thank you for the plug, by the way, here at 8:30 next Tuesday.
That's right.
Okay, so do we have any other further discussion on that, or move on?
Move on. Okay, now you're going to update us on the sales tax revenue performance.
Good news is we're up again 3 months in a row. I'm still cautiously optimistic.
It wasn't up
with
as
that.
much as we wanted, so.
That's right. I was hoping for
we're
double
kind of-
digits.
We're happy but disappointed.
Yes. Okay. So we were up 5% in August compared with the same month last year, but we were still short of our original budget by $554,000. Again, we remain cautiously optimistic and hope for even better numbers next month. But for now, that's where we are.
Now, Tina, Daniel and I were talking about this yesterday. Which month will we be seeing the increases? I'm assuming an increase from June, when we had the storms roll through, and we'll probably
That would have
see-
been this month.
So is that
So
included?
we're 2
in-
months.
Well, no, I mean, I just
This
want to
would
make
be
sure we point
June
out that,
sales tax revenue.
that storm occurred at the later part of June.
Almost July, so.
Almost July, so really.
A lot of the expenditures related to that then may not.
We'll be seeing them actually next month. So next month's numbers will be kind of skewed upward, you know. So again, yes, I think this one is still a fair indication of where we are compared to last year. I do want to point out that Odessa, Midland, some of the oil and gas cities and counties are doing extremely well in their sales tax revenues. Consumer confidence is really high in those areas, so we're hoping that that really continues to trickle in our direction as well. But again, we would have, Mary, you're right, we're hoping to see a better number than 5%, but we'll take it right now.
Just because I know a lot of people watch the city council meetings, and I want to remind everybody that the city counts on sales tax revenue in order to pay our bills. It's a very important part of what happens in this city. So I encourage people, support locally, buy locally, spend locally, because it's your local dollars that pay for the quality of life we have here in this city of San Angelo. And every time we go out of this city or we use Amazon or any other e-commerce sites to buy things, our city of San Angelo suffers. And so we want to be a lot more aggressive about encouraging everybody, buy local, support local, spend local. We need more than 5% increases in order to continue to fulfill the needs the citizens have for the quality of life.
Mayor, I'd also like to point out, and that's a very good point, I'd also like to point out that as our sales tax numbers go up, it actually helps with the property taxes as well, you know, so it helps us to stabilize those or reduce those. Again, when you have the second highest revenue source that we have, when that number goes up, it helps us to assist the number one revenue source that we have is property taxes. So as these numbers go up, it helps us to stabilize the property taxes as well.
May I also, for all of you who are listening and participating in the conversation about the tax increases the county is looking at, is that, you know, households don't have supplemental money, just bags of money sitting around. So when we increase property tax dollars, those dollars come from somewhere. And they're usually sales tax dollars. Because when you take it out of this pot to pay that property tax, it reduces the amount of money that goes into the sales tax pot, eating out less, buying fewer clothes, buying fewer appliances, updating the house at a later date, et cetera. So we need to make sure that we encourage spend local, shop local, support local. And with that, I am going to ask if there's any announcements.
Yes, Mayor, I have one. Councilwoman DeWitt and I both received letters last week from a constituent that was concerned about the new routes that the city buses were taking. That individual did not leave a name or contact information. So if they happen to be listening today, if they will contact either Billy DeWitt or myself or call the transit district, we may be able to assist them. But just let us know what your name is and where we can contact you.
With that, I ask for a motion for adjournment. No one wants us to adjourn. Okay, we'll just keep on going.
So moved.
Second.
Speak up. Second it. Vote on it. 7-0. Done.
Aye.